Star Trek Enterprise might have been a short-lived series compared to the likes of The Next Generation, but it did have time to introduce us to a whole new era of the Star Trek universe. In this era, we saw new starships, new species, new characters, and much, much more. To celebrate our love of Star Trek Enterprise and the many starships, characters, species, and critical events, we're diving into over 2 hours of Star Trek Enterprise lore in the Star Trek universe. Replicate yourself some popcorn, your favourite drink, and sit back and relax for this mega deep dive into Star Trek lore. If you enjoy these videos, hit that subscribe button and consider supporting the Trek Central team via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Okay, make it so. The NX class of starships were the ones that took humanity's first few steps into the final frontier. The lead ship of the class, Enterprise, took the idealism of Earth and Starfleet to countless worlds. As such, the NX class is responsible for much of Starfleet as we know it, and of course played a pivotal role in the founding the United Federation of Planets. But how many ships were there? Well, we know Enterprise is the lead ship. We also know that Columbia was the second NX class to launch after her delays in dry dock. However, surely there must be more, right? Officially in Star Trek canon, we know that NX-01 and NX-02 were commissioned and launched. Starfleet had planned to launch the NX-03 and the NX-04, but by the end of the Star Trek Enterprise series, we'd not seen them. So let's dive into our latest Star Trek Explained video. Welcome to Trek Central. I'm your host Captain Jack, and let's get into it. Before we do warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. But quick, we've got a new frontier. If you like these videos, consider hitting that join button down below and supporting Trek Central directly. Becoming a YouTube member means you get early access to these videos because you're a Galaxy class Trekkie. However, you also get to suggest video topics to us directly. Each month, we pick a suggestion from our members and turn it into a full video. Sounds great, right? Make it so and hit that join button today. Okay, engage. I don't need to tell you much about the NX-01 Enterprise. You likely know the story behind this ship. The NX-01 was the culmination of the NX project, launching as Enterprise in 2151. It would serve as Earth's first Warp 5 starship right up until 2161. Under the command of Captain Jonathan Archer, Enterprise established the United Earth and Starfleet as a legitimate interstellar power. It caused a wholesale revolution in the Alpha and Beta Quadrant, paving a way to the creation of a coalition of planets which would transform into the United Federation of Planets in 2161. During the Earth Romulan War, Enterprise was refitted. This can be seen in Star Trek Picard in 2401 when the ship is resting in the Fleet Museum. We've done a complete breakdown of the Enterprise NX-01 here on the channel, including her technical aspects and her missions, plus some you did not know about. Go check that out, as today we're focusing on the other NX class ships. Finally launched in 2154, the NX-02 Columbia was the second NX class to roll off a production line. The second NX would launch with many improvements learned from Enterprise's time in space. She would take part in a few engagements in her first year in space, under the command of Captain Enrique Hernandez. Again, we've done a full breakdown on the NX-02 and the tragic fate of the ship here on the Trek Central channel. Watch that video via the link in the video description if you'd like to know more. Okay, for the rest of the NX class starships, we actually need to go into the Star Trek extended canon, or rather beta canon. This material comes from books, video games, and comics. As such, it is not counted towards the main canon of the Star Trek universe. Just a little disclaimer from us so you know what we're talking about. The NX-03 was mentioned as being planned in Star Trek Enterprise. However, by the end of the series, it had not yet come to light. Still, Star Trek Expanded media builds upon this. Technically, there are 2 NX-03 starships. Let me explain. In the Enterprise novel, Kobayashi Maru, it's mentioned that in 2155, the NX-03 known as Challenger was still under construction. Captain Jonathan Archer contemplated asking Starfleet to rush her into service, so that the ship could take on his less than engaging mission of protecting the Earth Cargo Service trade route. Challenger was eventually launched in August 2155 under the command of Captain Roy Dunsel. The ship would play a role in the Earth Romulan War, where on the 10th of March 2156, the Challenger would be destroyed in the Battle of Andorian. Captain Dunsel activated the ship's self-destruct and rammed a Romulan warbird. This was done so in a successful effort to prevent the Romulans from attacking Andorian or taking control of Challenger. All hands were lost in this effort. Now, as I mentioned, 2 NX-03s, you might be wondering about the second. The book, Federation, the first 150 years, gives the NX-03 the name of Excalibur. This book places Captain Brand Styles in command of the ship. The ship was launched around the same time as the Challenger version and would also take part in the Earth Romulan War. Here, events differ a bit due to this book. Columbia and Excalibur would take part in the defense of Starbase 1 at Elgeron. On the 18th of May 2156, 2156, the Romulans would dispatch 5 Suurok-class warbirds into the system, which marked the first attack of the Earth-Romulan War. Columbia would defend the starbase and would ultimately be destroyed. The Excalibur, on the other hand, had 2 warbirds pursue her out of his system. Captain Starks took Excalibur into the Gamma Hydra system, where he put First Officer Bryce Schumann into a shuttle pod and hid them in a trail of a comet. The Romulans would arrive and destroy Excalibur. Thankfully, Schumann was recovered by Enterprise around 10 days later. However, they would learn that Excalibur and Columbia had been destroyed. If you were to ask me, I would say Challenger makes more sense of a name for this NX-class ship. The 4th NX-class starship to enter service would be the NX-04 named Discovery. The ship would be launched in late August of 2155 under the command of Captain Curtis. The ship would work with Vulcan cruisers on occasion, testing its abilities. Unfortunately, the Discovery met its fate on November 8th. The ship responded to a distress call from Starbase 1, located in the Baranga system. Discovery arrived to find the human and Vulcan bases on the planet had been completely wiped out. While preparing rescue operations to search for survivors, Discovery came under attack from Romulan Nihir attack Raptors, which used Alt-Star nuclear weapons. With their senses blinded by the attack, the Romulans took the opportunity to inflict crippling damage on the ship. Captain Curtis made the decision. The crew evacuated to the surface of the planet via escape pods, while Curtis remained on board to ensure the log and the crew escaped before the warp core breach. This act of heroism cost him his life, as Discovery was destroyed. It marked the first of the NX class of starships to be destroyed. Once again, the book, The First 150 Years of the Federation, has its own version of the NX-04. This time around, the ship is called the Constellation rather than Discovery. Not much is known about this NX class. We know it launched in 2156 and served in the Earth-Romulan War. At one point, it was unable to participate in the Battle of Shran, as it underwent repairs following a successful defense of Starbase 2. The 5th NX class of starship to be launched would be the NX-05 Atlantis, launched under the command of Captain Weiss in late February 2156. The ship would oversee testing of a new detection system. These detection grids were provided by the Vulcans for Coalition worlds, deal with the incoming threat of a Romulan star empire. Atlantis would, at some point, accompany the newly refitted Columbia-class SS Enterprise during a multi-day standoff with a squadron of Romulan birds of prey. The Romulans would engage with Starfleet ships, shooting first and hitting Atlantis. Thankfully, Earth forces managed to damage a bird of prey, forcing the others to disperse. Unfortunately, Atlantis would be destroyed on June 2156 over Tal Ceti 4. The Romulans would commence an invasion, forcing Atlantis to defend the location. The ship was lost, but the crew managed to escape via escape pods. Interestingly, the IDW comic book series called Starfleet Academy tells a different story of the NX-05. In this adventure, the ship is called the Slayton, and was launched around the same time as Atlantis. The ship would be under the command of Captain Bran Hendricks. The Slayton would visit the Wagner 219 star system. While investigating, it was engulfed by a temporal anomaly. After nearly 50 days of being trapped inside the anomaly, Chief Engineer Jack Summers mutinied against Captain Hendricks. However, outside of the anomaly, a century had passed, and Starfleet officially placed the entire system under a quarantine, never knowing what happened to the NX-05 Slayton. But that's not the end of this NX-05 version's history. In the Kelvin timeline, which was the Starship 2009 movie timeline, a team of Starfleet Academy cadets also became trapped in the same temporal anomaly. On the Slayton, Chief Summers stood down his mutiny. The crew managed to band together and use the remaining resources to escape the anomaly. Upon exiting, the Slayton was greeted by the Armstrong-class USS Wilson, which revealed they had jumped over to the Kelvin timeline. The 6th NX-class starship launched was the Endeavour. Officially launched on the 2nd of June 2156, she sailed out under the command of Captain Winchester, 4 months after NX-05 Atlantis. Though historical records show that after the death of Captain Winchester, their executive officer, she assumed command. Due to technical problems with the ship's computers, the Endeavour fortunately had more protection from Romulans attempting to remotely take over the ship. During the Earth-Romulan War, the Endeavour did have a small engagement with the Romulans, before the official opening of a hostility between the two governments. This took place near the planet of Shran 4. The Battle of Altair 6 would be costly. Endeavour took serious damage when her portside hull plating was melted off through the use of Romulan nuclear weapons. During this battle, Captain She was severely injured and would later die. This forced Lieutenant Commander Stephen Reynard to take command of the NX-class ship. They would later be promoted to captain. Following the end of the Earth-Romulan War, the Endeavour was refit to the Columbia-class specification. This was a major refit for the NX-class, which meant the ship now sported a new secondary hull. The ship would be rechristened as the USS Endeavour NCC-06. Pohl, formerly of NX-01 Enterprise, was promoted to the rank of captain and assumed command of the ship. While being under the command of T'Pol, the ship would occasionally serve as the flagship of Admiral Jonathan Archer. Malcolm Reeves served as first officer of the Endeavour for a time, before being promoted to captain. In March 2164, Endeavour transported Admiral Admiral Archer and Commissioner Saval to Rigel for talks about admitting the Rigel worlds into the Federation of Planets. Endeavour would continue to serve a newly created Federation for many years. We don't have an end date for Endeavour's service, but I imagine it should be long decommissioned by the dawn of the 23rd century. The Star Trek book, Stellar Cartography, the Starfleet Reference Library, lists the NX-06 being the USS Defiant. Not much is known about this version of the NX class, but it is listed as having been destroyed in the Battle of Shran by Romulan warbirds. The 7th NX-class starship launch was the Intrepid. It replaced the Intrepid NVO-1, which was still in active service by 2159. The ship had launched around the 2160s under the command of Captain Jason Lambert. Following the end of the Earth-Romulan War in 2161, the Intrepid was undergoing repairs in the near G231 star system. Captain Lambert, who was on the hull in an EV suit, noticed a strange flare in the distance. While attempting to report the disturbance to Starfleet Command, communications were cut off. With a loss of communications, the Navarre ship was dispatched to investigate by Admiral Shran Collins. Upon arrival, only the corpses of crew members were found, as was parts of the Intrepid's hull. The Navarre was unable to find the cause of the ship's disappearance, or why there was a lack of debris. Starfleet would later determine the Intrepid fell victim to a Romulan minefield. In reality, Intrepid had been caught in a pull of a trans slipstream. This caused time to accelerate so much that the ship aged by 2,500 years, also stranding the ship around 200 light years away in the Angie cluster. Fast forward to the year of 2383, the USS Enterprise E would locate the NX-07 Intrepid. Starfleet dispatched the Galaxy-class USS Challenger to recover the ancient NX-class starship. Due to some issues, shall we say, caused by Ferengi Damon Bok and crew member Berlingov Ramson, the Intrepid was lost as they attempted to slingshot around the sun. The ship was disintegrated. Once again, our favourite book, The First 150 Years, gives the NX-07 as the name of the USS Lexington. Following the official declaration of war against the Romulan Star Empire on June 1st, 2156, Admiral Douglas ordered more NX class to be put into production. The Lexington, along with the Defiant, would launch soon. Fast forward to 2160, in January, the Lexington would lead a fleet of Denobulan warships towards the Romulan homeworld of Romulus, in a bid to force the Romulan fleet to retreat from the Battle of Shran and defend their homeworld. This ruse was successful. It enabled the USS Enterprise and USS Atlantis to destroy the Imperial Romulan warbird Koto, as well as to sail with the IRW Tulus, as they attempted to withdraw from Shran. With the 3 remaining warbirds on their way back to Romulus, the Lexington and her fleet turned back. The 9th NX class to be launched was the Avenger. Unfortunately, we do not have an exact date of her launch. We do know she was active early enough to fight in the Earth-Romulan War. In 2161, following the founding of the Federation, Avenger was rechristened as the USS Avenger and given to Captain Shran, a veteran of Andoria. Interestingly, no NX-08. In the Mirror Universe episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, we see the ISS Avenger. The ship would be destroyed in 2155 by Starfleet rebels, controlling the time-displaced 23rd century USS Defiant. So, that is the main list of the NX-class line of starships. We do know that the Curry, which was listed as the NX-16, was active during the Earth-Romulan War, as seen in the Star Trek video game Legacy. By the existence of the NX-16, that would suggest there was more vessels of the NX-class. However, this is unknown and not confirmed. Unfortunately, instances like this is where the extended canon of the Star Trek universe does get messy. We also know that the NX Tyson, later the USS Tyson, would be commissioned by Starfleet. It was given to Vulcan Captain Spock. The ship, lacking a number designation for the NX class, took part in a training exercise with the NX-09 Avenger, under the command of Captain Shran. No fate is given for the Tyson or what number the ship is, though I would like to personally think it's the NX-08 given Avenger is NX-09. Star Trek Online, the MMO video game, would include the USS Utopia, an NX-class starship. There is a very long story here due to the Temporal Cold War, so maybe we'll tell the story another day. Yes, it is a long one. In the Mirror Universe, we do know there was an NX class of ships with names such as the Bismarck, Broadsword, Dauntless, Interceptor, and Khan's Wrath. We could presume some of these ships would perhaps fit between the NX-09 Avenger and the NX-16 Curry. But then again, the Mirror Universe would choose different names from the ones in the Prime timeline, so it's unknown if these would have existed in the main timeline. For example, I find it hard to believe that Starfleet would commission an NX-class ship called Khan's Wrath. It does sound rather evil. Star Trek Beta Canon does make mention of 16 NX-class starships, as with the discovery of the Intrepid, it marks all the ships accounted for. So what's the 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 might have been called, we don't know. I'll leave a question for you in the comments. What do you think would make a good name for an NX class of starship in the Star Trek universe? Personally, I would love to name one Titan, perhaps another callback to the legendary ships we find in later series like Star Trek Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. Of course, the main crew from Star Trek Enterprise were the series stars, but let's be honest, Jeffrey Combs as Commander Shran stole every episode he was in. How can you not love the Andorian who started out with a rough relationship with Captain Jonathan Archer, but slowly grew into a character you love to see turn up each season? But whatever happened to him? We recently explored and learned about the fate of Archer's NX-01 command crew. But what about Shran? Where did he end up in the Star Trek universe? In today's Star Trek Explained video, we take a look at the history of Shran in the Star Trek universe. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host Captain Jack, and let's get into it. But before we warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. While you're watching, which character or topic from the Star Trek universe should we explore next? Who else are you interested in knowing more about? Okay, engage. Now, a quick little disclaimer, most of the content we will talk about comes from Star Trek books, comics, and maybe some video games. This is regarded as Star Trek's beta canon, also known as the Expanded Universe. As such, we'll use reference footage from Star Trek Enterprise on your screens. Don't worry, we'll also include links to where you can get these books for yourself in the video description. Okay, let's go. To catch up with Shran's story and provide context to what we'll talk about, let's look back to where we last prominently saw Commander Shran. No, not the Star Trek Enterprise final episode, but rather the Romulan drone crisis. In November 2154, the Kumari was annihilated by a Romulan drone ship masquerading as a Tellarite craft. Shran, his officer Talos, and 18 other crew members evacuated via escape pods before being retrieved by the NX-1 Enterprise, under the command of Captain Jonathan Archer. The Earth starship was also carrying Gor Bim Gral, who was the Tellarite ambassador. Convinced Gral was responsible for the Kumari's destruction, Shran stormed into his quarters and threatened him at weapon point. Though Archer diffused the immediate conflict, Gral's associate, Narg, shot Talos, leading to her demise. Seeking vengeance for Talos' death, Shran invoked the Ushan challenge against Narg, but Archer stepped in as Narg's substitute. The confrontation concluded when Archer severed Shran's left antenna, leaving him vulnerable. Investigations later revealed that Romulans were operating their unmanned drone vessels through a telepathic control executed by the Aenar, which were a subspecies of the Andorian people. Archer and Shran journeyed to Andoria to seek the assistance from the Aenar, with again Jahamel's support. Through her intervention, they succeeded in convincing Gareb, the Romulan ship's controller, to cease the offensive. It did result in his own death, but the Romulan plot to destabilize the growing alliances was stopped. Following the conclusion of these incidents, Shran made his way back to Andoria, where circumstances compelled him to step down from the Imperial Guard, after which he elected to reside with the Aenar. Half a year passed before Shran witnessed the establishment of the Shelby Bond group composing his Aenar friends. Just as the Aenar ritual drew to a close, Orion raiders stormed the location, swiftly capturing and transferring Aenar members to their vessel. Given the Aenar's non-violent principles, only Shran could offer resistance, though he was quickly subdued and forced to observe helplessly as Jamal, who he had grown to cherish, was captured. After the incident, Shran and Ferris reached out to Captain Archer, seeking assistance in locating his Aenar friends. Initially hesitant due to his commitment to attend the Coalition compact signing on Earth, Archer ultimately chose to support Shran. They successfully traced the Orion's vessel's warp signature to Agion Prime. At this point, both Captain Archer and Shran strongly suspected that the Romulans had orchestrated the Aenar's capture through the Orions and the Adigions. When diplomatic efforts to locate the Orion vessel proved unsuccessful, Archer determined that a landing party would descend to the planet's surface to investigate an Orion slave market. When they were able to capture an Orion guard in the hopes of interrogating him, Archer had to hold Shran back after he nearly killed the guard. However, Shran's methods were good for loosening the Orion's tongue, as he pleaded with Archer not to let Shran near him again. The guard did reveal that the Orion vessel had transferred the Aenar to a Romulan freighter that was heading into Romulan space. The guard's colleagues arrived to rescue him, but thankfully a timely beam-up saved the party from becoming slaves. Lacking the precise coordinates of the vessel, Commander T'Pol devised a strategy to link Shran to the telepresence apparatus previously engineered by Commander Tucker during their earlier encounter with the Aenar. Despite not possessing telepathic abilities, there are suggestive of a profound connection between Shran and Jamal might enable a telepathic bond. The initial trial almost harmed Shran's mental state and damaged the equipment, but during the second attempt, he successfully pinpointed the Aenar's location. Defying Starfleet Command's orders, Captain Archer took Enterprise into Romulan territory to pursue the cargo vessel. Upon interception, Shran and Ferris accompanied a strike team tasked with locating the Aenar. While the Enterprise engaged two Romulan warbirds in combat, Ferris employed his telepathic abilities to initially conceal the strike team from Romulan detection, ultimately compelling the Romulans to direct their weapons at one another. With the sentries neutralized, the strike team and the remaining Aenar were transported back to Enterprise. Unfortunately, Ferris did choose to stay on the Romulan cargo ship to detonate the craft, preventing his capture by the Romulans. Before he perished, he expressed his desire for Shran to join the Aenar Shrelov Bond group alongside his companion. These events were told through the Star Trek Enterprise novel, The Good That Men Do. Of course, it would not be long before one of the worst events in the 22nd century kicked off, this being the Earth-Romulan War. By the early phases of the Earth-Romulan War, Shran stayed retired. Yet when several former shipmates from the Kumari perished in the Battle of Thralion 4, Shran re-entered the Imperial Guard with his bondmates' approval. After rejoining the Andorian Imperial Guard, Shran received a promotion to the rank of General, and was appointed to the command of the IGS Waitan. In his new position aboard the Waitan, Shran was tasked with overseeing the Vulcan warp detection grid within the Andor system. During this assignment, his crew noticed multiple grid sensors becoming non-operational, which ultimately revealed that the Romulans were launching an assault. During the ensuing conflict, Shran permitted the Earth vessels, NX-03 Challenger and USS Yorktown, to engage in the combat. Unfortunately, the Romulans seized Andorian auxiliary fighters, compelling Shran to eliminate the craft. During the Battle of Andoria, the NX-03 Challenger was lost with all hands. This was done via Captain Roy Dunsel activating the ship's self-destruct and ramming a Romulan warbird. While losing the vessel, it prevented it from attacking Andoria and taking control of the Challenger. After the engagement, Shran became intoxicated on Frisian grain wine due to his anguish over destroying fellow Andorians. Later that year, Shran enlisted in the Armada that reclaimed Geneva from the Romulans. As the end of the year of 2156 set in, General Shran would retire from the Imperial Guard once again. This was due to the decision by both the Andorian and Tellarite governments to withdraw from the Earth-Romulan War. He would return to his bondmates and daughter Tala on Andoria. In 2160, upon learning of Starfleet's decisive assault on Shran, Shran felt compelled to take action. With assistance from the Klingon known as Kolos, he assembled a fleet of armed merchant vessels and hastened to support Captain Archer. During the conflict, while most of his vessels were annihilated, he provided crucial time for reinforcements of Vulcan, Andorian, and Tellarite warships to arrive, leading to the Earth-Romulan War's conclusion through the obliteration of the Romulan fleet. Shran's actions and movements during the Earth-Romulan War were told through the Enterprise novels Beneath the Raptor's Wing and To Brave the Storm. After forming the United Federation of Planets and establishing a Federation Starfleet in 2161, newly promoted Admiral Jonathan Archer persuaded Shran to join the fledgling organization. He was given the rank of Admiral and became Chief of Staff of the Andorian Guard branch of Starfleet. In that capacity, he was in charge of the defense of the entire new Federation. In 2161, amidst the Vertian crisis, he took direct command of a Starfleet task force operating in the Kundari sector, establishing his base at Rigel 5. Despite facing considerable pressure from various Federation officials, Shran maintained his commitment to pursuing a diplomatic approach with the Vertians. His steadfast dedication to peaceful resolution eventually proved successful, due to significant part in the diplomatic endeavours of Captain T'Pol and her crew aboard the USS Endeavour. In 2165, Shran authorised the commitment of 7 Andorian Guard ships to the Starfleet Task Force sent to find the origin of the Ware. The Ware crisis after this had kicked off massively. We recently recapped these events in our video, which spoke about another Star Trek Enterprise character, Malcolm Reed. Check that one out on the Trek Central YouTube channel. Shran's involvement in the United Federation of Planets is told through the Enterprise novels, A Choice of Futures, and Uncertain Logic. Having gained political experience during his military service, including his role in the Waitan Pan-Mock Treaty negotiations, Shran would eventually secure a position on the Federation Council. It would seem Shran's story ends here. He would publish his memoirs by the Andorian High Command in the Andorian year of 6180. It is not known what happened to him, but by the late 24th century, a cerulean statue of the Andorian legend was located in Libok and visible from the offices of Vane. She is the Andorian representative to the Federation Council in the late 2370s. Personally, we like to believe that Shran would go back and settle on Andoria with his family. That sounds like a nice ending for the character. What do you think? Have you got your own version of events for Shran? Before we had the likes of the Galaxy-class starship flying around the galaxy, humanity in the Star Trek universe had to start somewhere with interstellar travel. One of the key projects towards human space exploration into the final frontier was the NX project, also known as the NX test program. This was Starfleet's effort to develop a brand new starship which would use the engine designed by the Warp 5 program. This was a pivotal program in the history of humanity. It would lead to Earth becoming an interstellar power, as well as the founding of the United Federation of Planets. Prior to the NX project, human starships were incapable of exceeding Warp 2. Today, in our Star Trek Lore Explained, we'll explore how humanity completed the NX project, which culminated in the launch of the NX-01 Enterprise. Let's go. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack, and let's get into it. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then hit that subscribe button for the latest from the Star Trek universe. While you're here, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Oh, and you can join our Discord server. If you feel like supporting the channel, hit that join button to access our private chat channels to help make future videos, and chat with the crew and me. Okay, engage. Before Starfleet began real, proper exploration of space, the Earth cargo service was humanity's only real presence in outer space. These ships were typically limited to speeds of under Warp 2. The crews of these cargo vessels would spend years travelling from one planet to another. The first generation of humans born into outer space were born on these cargo ships and would become known as boomers. Travis Mayweather, who would go on to serve on board the NX-01 Enterprise, was a boomer. He was born on board the ECS Horizon, a J-class freighter, during the year of 2126. The NX project began to allow humanity's knowledge to expand and adequately continue space exploration. Before we dive into that, we must get the background of how this project came to be. Let's look at the Warp 5 program. Of course, the story of humanity's warp program development begins with a Phoenix. During the 2060s, Dr. Zephram Cochrane and his team of engineers began developing the warp drive. The challenge of inventing warp theory took Cochrane an extremely long time. By April 2063, Cochrane had planned to pilot the Phoenix, Earth's first warp ship, on a test warp flight. Unfortunately, the Phoenix launch site was attacked by a Borg sphere, which had come back in time to try and disrupt humanity's future. Thankfully, the crew of the USS Enterprise E arrived and dealt with a Borg sphere. While the Enterprise E dealt with being boarded by Borg drones and the Borg Queen, Commander Riker and his away team helped Dr. Cochrane launch the Phoenix as scheduled. It took some convincing, but eventually on April 5th, 2063, Cochrane was ready to make the trip. The Phoenix was launched, with Enterprise E's Commander Riker and Lieutenant Commander Jordan LaForge accompanying Dr. Cochrane as his flight assistants. The warp barrier was broken by Cochrane and the Phoenix just after 11 AM. This was enough to draw the attention of a Vulcan survey ship, the Diplana Half, which was passing near Earth. That evening, Dr. Cochrane was among many human spectators who watched the Vulcan ship land in Bozeman, Montana, making first contact with humanity. During the early 22nd century, Cochrane would design a new style of warp reactor that was fitted aboard the J-class freighters. There was a rumour that the Doctor personally signed the inside of each reactor casing, though that was not proved by the 2150s, at least. The United Earth Space Probe Agency commissioned the development project known as the Warp 5 program. This was an effort to develop the Warp 5 engine. Some of the key scientists working on this project including Doctors Zephram Cochrane, Henry Archer, and Tazaki. Much of the work these scientists did took place at the Warp 5 complex, located on Earth just outside of Bozeman, Montana from 2119 onward. While progress was made, the project did see setbacks. For starters, it was overseen by the Vulcans, who were somewhat aiding humanity in their work. Though, as some might know, the Vulcans were very cautious, and some individuals saw the species as holding humanity back. The Vulcans feared that the humans were rushing into things too quickly. Dr. Archer would work closely with Dr. Cochrane to develop the Warp 5 engine, as part of the NX program. Archer was responsible for some key breakthroughs, including for a derivation of a flux paradox, which is more accurate than the one used by his Vulcan mentors. This breakthrough was a culmination of years of frustration with the Vulcans. Prior to 2119, Dr. Archer would take his son, Jonathan Archer, on a tour of the Warp 5 complex. The same year that the Warp 5 complex had its dedication ceremony, Dr. Zephram Cochrane would disappear. Unfortunately, Dr. Henry Archer would die in 2124 before the Warp 5 engine could be constructed. The Vulcans held back the engine development program. This stalled humanity's progress and resulted in Jonathan Archer's resentment towards the Vulcans. This resentment would grow into a grudge, which Jonathan held until the 2150s. By the early 2140s, the NX project was in operation. We don't have a precise date on the actual foundation of the project, but it likely followed significant work on the Warp 5 program. By this time, Starfleet had been established. Commodore Maxwell Forrest oversaw the NX project from its earliest stages in the 2140s. During these years, the project had fielded several test vehicles, with prototype versions of the Warp 5 engine. The prototypes were piloted by a series of test pilots, including commanders Jonathan Archer, A.G. Robinson, Gardner, and Duval. At least one engineering team was overseeing the NX program, headed by Captain Jeffries. Lieutenant Charles Tucker III was assigned to work on Jeffries' engineering team. The NX program saw initial progress on speeds below Warp 2. However, the project would stall sometime prior to 2143. The test flight of the NX Alpha, led by Commander Robinson, ended in a disaster following an explosion after the ship's engines were pushed ever so slightly beyond Warp 2. Once again, Vulcans thought humanity was pushing forward too fast. As such, the Vulcan Advisory Council recommended the NX project be suspended, which it was. Due to this decision, Lieutenant Tucker and Commander Archer believed the designs of the prototype Warp 5 engine to be sound. During research, Tucker's analysis of the engine's intermix ratio of the fuel flowing through the antimatter injectors proved to be the root of the problem. This time, corrections were made to the NX Beta. The Beta was illegally piloted by Commanders Archer and Robertson, which resulted in a successful test flight. While breaking direct orders, the success of the NX Beta effectively confirmed the utility of the Warp 5 engine. Still, the Vulcans would require over a year of additional ground-based simulations following the flight. Around 8 months after the flight of the NX Beta, Duval would break the Warp 3 barrier using the NX Delta. The rapid success of the NX project would lead to many advancements within Starfleet and the program. For example, new starships were produced, including one which would eventually be named the USS Franklin, the first starship to achieve Warp 4. In 2149, the project saw the keel of the Enterprise NX-01 being laid. This would be the first generation of Warp 5 starships for Starfleet and the United Earth. In April 2151, the NX-01 Enterprise became the culmination of the NX project, as she was finally launched above Earth. By this time, Forrest had been promoted to Admiral and selected Jonathan Archer to be promoted to Captain and placed in command of the NX-01 Enterprise. While the Vulcans did object, as they felt Captain Gardner would make a better choice, the decision was ultimately Forrest's to make. By the time of the NX-01 launch, another 3 vessels of the NX class were on the drawing board. We know the NX-02 Columbia was finally launched in November 2154, becoming the second of the NX class to be launched. The NX program played a large role in Starfleet's interstellar exploration, and Admiral Forrest remained in charge of overseeing its operations. In 2154, Forrest was killed in a bombing on Vulcan, while saving the life of Vulcan Ambassador Saval. The NX program was then placed under the command of newly promoted Admiral Gardner. It's not quite clear if the NX project remained active after Enterprise and the other NX class vessels were launched. It might have been absorbed into the operations of Starfleet as they took command of the vessels and sent them on missions. With the successful launch of the Enterprise and Columbia, as well as plans for the NX-03 and the NX-04, there will be no further need for the NX project anymore. It had succeeded. It's also not entirely clear in the Star Trek canon how the USS Franklin connects with the NX project. Given that it is Earth's first Warp 4 vessel, it would likely have to have been born out of the NX project's experiments with the warp engine designs and tests. We've recently covered the history of the USS Franklin here on the channel. Check out that video linked below. In Star Trek's extended media, the Enterprise novels, Kobayashi Maru and Beneath the Raptor's Wing, tell the stories that follow the series of Star Trek Enterprise. During those novels, we learn that 4 additional NX class ships, the NX-03 Challenger, NX-04 Discovery, NX-05 Atlantis, and NX-06 Endeavour were commissioned and launched before Starfleet shut down the NX program, in favour of a Daedalus class of starship. The Daedalus class was considered to be constructed faster and cheaper. We've previously produced a video here on the Trek Central YouTube channel, which has explored the history of the NX class and the story of each starship launched. If you're interested in checking that out, as it's an excellent deep dive into the NX class line of ships, then please see that video linked below. Perhaps the most iconic Klingon starships in Star Trek were the Birds of Prey. These were agile attack craft that served as the backbone of the Klingon Imperial fleet. One of the most well-known Klingon Birds of Prey was the Suurok-class, which we've discussed in a video before, and you can find a link down below. But before the time of the Suurok-class, the Klingons used another, similar Bird of Prey model, as seen in Star Trek Enterprise. This 22nd century Bird of Prey, which was known as the Von Tolk-class in some extended media sources, was a formidable ship for its time, though refits to human starships like Enterprise soon left it somewhat outclassed. Today, we'll dive in and take a look at this 22nd century Bird of Prey. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack, and let's get into the video. Of course, before we do warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. Of course, you might know, we're enjoying making these Star Trek videos, but we need your support to continue making them, especially in the day and age of copyright content and just YouTube and Paramount being difficult to work with. As such, we've recently launched our Patreon, and we invite you to check it out and hopefully consider supporting the development of these YouTube videos. Head over there via the link in the video description to get access to exclusive videos, including interviews with Star Trek legends, events such as book clubs, and much more. If you have any questions about the Patreon, comment down below in this video comment section. I'll personally answer them myself. Now, as always, do let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Oh, and while you're watching, comment on what you would name a Klingon bird of prey. Okay, quapla! The Von Torque-class bird of prey was manufactured in the 2140s by engineers working for the House of Antak, one of the great houses of the Klingon Empire. The class was launched in 2149 and quickly became one of the most common ships in the Klingon Imperial fleet, serving as both a scout and fast attack craft. The 22nd century Klingon bird of prey was 145.36 meters in length, and its design was very similar to the later Klingon bird of prey models. The ship consisted of a bulbous aft engineering section with prominent radiator grills and two large engine modules on its dorsal hull. A pair of downswept wings tipped with disruptor cannons and a teardrop-shaped forward section connected to the aft by a long neck. This class of bird of prey could reach up to Warp 5, the top speed of the fastest contemporary human starships. The ship's reactor complex and warp engine sections were located towards the top of the dorsal hull, and they connected to warp coils built into the ship's wings rather than the conventional warp nacelles. The ship's warp drive operated according to the same principles as a human equivalent, despite the difference in how the warp coils were laid out. This bird of prey also featured two impulse engines, which were housed in prominent nacelles atop the dorsal hull. These impulse engines were powerful, making the bird of prey both fast and maneuverable at sublight speeds. It's unknown if this class of bird of prey was capable of planetary landings as later classes were, though it was aerodynamic enough that it was likely capable of atmospheric flight. Apart from the warp and impulse systems, the aft section of the bird of prey featured the ship's shuttle bay, which was accessed via hangar doors on the ventral tail end of the ship, as well as escape pod berths, which carried a number of one-person pods equipped with basic steering controls. At the time this starship was in use, the Klingons had yet to develop transporter technology, so this class of bird of prey also featured docking umbilicals for ship-to-ship transfers of cargo or personnel. At the bases of the wings, the ship featured prominent radiator grills, which dispersed excess heat from the ship's reactor systems. Most of the bird of prey's crew decks were located in the aft section. Spread across 4 decks, these sections included the crew quarters, main engineering, several laboratories, the galley, the mess hall, the targ pits for carrying live food, and more. Meanwhile, the forward section of the ship contained the bird of prey's bridge and command decks, which were connected to the rest of the ship by a broad corridor that ran through the starship's neck. Typically, this class of bird of prey was manned by a crew of 18 to 48, and its interior was similar in style to later Klingon starships. We mean this because the interior was cramped and could be uncomfortable, and it was strictly functional in design, with mechanical elements often exposed along the walls. The bridge was also similar in layout to later Klingon starships, with a view screen at the front end of the bridge, a central command chair for the captain, and up to a dozen other stations located in a ring around the captain's chair. Unlike the birds of prey commanded by later generations of Klingons, the 22nd century bird of prey did not have a cloaking device, but it did have tough armour and strong shields. Specifically, the bird of prey was equipped with dispersive armour, which, at least around the heavily armoured bridge module, was strong enough to absorb the weapons fire of a contemporary human starship. The shields of this class of bird of prey were stronger in the front than in the aft, reflecting the Klingon impulse to meet their enemies head-on in battle, which left the aft end vulnerable in certain combat situations. For a 22nd century starship, the Klingon bird of prey was heavily armed, with more disruptive mounts than later 23rd and 24th century birds of prey. But like with later birds of prey, the ship's main disruptor cannons were mounted on the wingtips, but it also featured 2 similarly powerful disruptor cannons mounted in a turret on the underside of the starship. This ventral turret had a wide firing arc, and it was further supported by 2 additional dual-mounted disruptor turrets on either side of the ship's head. These 4 disruptors were smaller and had a smaller firing arc, but they still added yet more firepower to an already well-armed starship. On top of these disruptors, the bird of prey boasted a pair of tractor beam projectors mounted to the underside of the ship's wings, which could snare smaller craft and drag them towards the ship's ventral docking port. It also featured 2 photon torpedo launchers, one mounted forward at the bow of the ship and one mounted aft. All 8 of the bird of prey's disruptors, as well as one of its torpedo launchers, had forward firing arcs, further encouraging Klingon captains to attack their enemies head-on. A frontal assault from a bird of prey was devastating, but a maneuverable enemy that could get behind one of them found it much less heavily armed on the aft end. A ship attacking the bird of prey from a right angle would be able to avoid all of the starship's disruptors, and this, then coupled with the fact that bird of prey's aft end had weaker shields than the forward end, could leave the bird of prey extremely vulnerable. Additionally, for all of the strengths of its defenses, this model of bird of prey had a serious design flaw. A direct hit right in the front of a warp reactor module would strike the ship's plasma junction, causing a chain reaction that would disable the vessel's power grid. The 22nd century Klingon bird of prey played a similar role in the Klingon fleet as later bird of prey models, but with key differences stemming from its lack of a cloaking device. These birds of prey mainly saw use as scouts or as escorts for larger cruisers, and they were also deployed either alone or in small squadrons as fast attacking raiders. They were designed for speed, maneuverability, and firepower, meant to attack enemy craft head-on without warning. Their agility and small target profile made them difficult to hit, and their extensive weaponry allowed them to overwhelm larger starships. All told, they were versatile and reliable, able to be deployed for a variety of combat situations. The first Klingon bird of prey encountered by humanity was commanded by Duras, son of Taral, who ambushed the Enterprise NX-01 on the edge of a Sol system in order to capture Captain Archer. Duras' bird of prey proved to be more than a match for the Enterprise in a straight fight, but when other Earth Starfleet ships came to Enterprise's aid, Duras was forced to withdraw, as his lone ship couldn't stand up to multiple Starfleet vessels at once. Several months later, Duras ambushed the Enterprise again, only to learn the hard way that it had been upgraded with stronger hull plating and photonic torpedoes, allowing it to match Duras' bird of prey in battle. Duras was forced to withdraw again, but he soon recruited 2 other birds of prey to provide support, and a small squadron attacked Enterprise a final time on the edge of a Delphic expanse. The 3 ships attacking together forced Enterprise to flee into a nearby region of thermobaric clouds. Duras and his bird of prey pursued, but his escorts didn't, and Duras' lone bird of prey was outmaneuvered by Enterprise within the nebula. Duras had ordered his crew to increase power to the forward shields, leaving a bird of prey's aft end undefended. Between this and the vessel's lack of aft end firepower, Enterprise was able to easily destroy the Klingon warship after getting behind it. Later, in 2154, another bird of prey was commandeered by a group of human augments, who spaced the ship's original Klingon crew. Originally, the augment's captain was Rakin, but he was overthrown by another augment named Malik, who commanded the bird of prey in a mission to rescue Arak Soom, the augment's father, from Enterprise. Malik's bird of prey easily destroyed an Orion interceptor attacking the Enterprise, and successfully rescued Soom, but the Enterprise gave chase. The augment's bird of prey was destroyed by Enterprise in a later battle. This version of the bird of prey was designed by John Eves for Star Trek Enterprise's second season finale. Originally, when asked to design a new bird of prey for the show, Eves submitted a bird of prey variant that he had designed for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but was ultimately never used. This featured sharper edges, more skeletal wings, and additional disruptor cannons. This was originally meant to be a heavier bird of prey that the Klingons would have deployed in the Klingon-Cardassian War and the First Battle of Deep Space Nine. Eves did figure that the cut design could be repurposed as a 22nd century bird of prey. However, the producers of Enterprise disagreed, and Eves was sent back to the drawing board. He based his new design on the classic bird of prey originally designed for the films, which he attempted to make more primitive looking, adding the dorsal engine nacelles, block A heat exchangers, more external framework, and external cabling in order to make the ship look more experimental and dangerous to operate. Many design elements were borrowed from other Klingon ships designed for Enterprise, including a cut Klingon Battlecruiser. John Eves did incorporate one element from his cut Deep Space Nine bird of prey into the Enterprise version, this being increased firepower. Eves armed the ship to the teeth, incorporating new turrets and a belly gun inspired by those on World War II era aircraft. Once the design work was finished, the new Klingon bird of prey was built as a CGI model by Koji Kumamara. It ultimately appeared in 5 episodes of Enterprise, most of them in Season 4. The NX-01 Enterprise played an instrumental part in Starfleet's first voyages into interstellar exploration and galactic affairs. Under the command of Captain Jonathan Archer, Enterprise and her crew would pave the way for the founding of the United Federation of Planets. When Star Trek Enterprise ended, many of us were disappointed. The final was rushed. We never learned what would happen to the crew of the NX-01. In this video, we dive into the real fate of each NX-01 senior crewman. For the sake of not making this video last a year, we're only focusing on Archer's command crew, so the senior staff of the NX-01. Thanks to members of the Trek Central community for suggesting this video topic. Welcome to Trek Central. I'm your host Captain Jack, and let's get into it. But before we do warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. Don't forget, if you want to support the channel, you can hit that join button down below to get videos early and also suggest topics for us to make videos on. Okay, engage. As a heads up, most of the content we talk about in this video will come from books, games, and other off-screen sources. This is regarded as the Star Trek Extended Universe. Therefore, we'll use footage from Star Trek Enterprise and other sources to aid the information visually. If you want to check out some of the mentioned books, I've left the links in the video description, and I highly suggest you do read them. To make life easy, we'll focus on the events before and after Star Trek Enterprise's series finale, mainly as the series final of These Are the Voyages takes place in 2161, a time jump from a previous episode of 2154. During this time, the Romulan War took place, which was a significant event. However, in 2161, the founding of the Federation takes place, so we'll cover events before and after this. Don't worry, we will make the dates clear on screen. Okay, of course, we are going to start with Jonathan Archer. He officially took command of the NX-01 Enterprise in 2151, and would command the Starship for a decade until 2161. Let's see where he ended up. In the latter half of the 2150s, the Earth-Romulan War was officially declared. Captain Archer led a task force to liberate Bengaria 7 from the Romulan Star Empire, an engagement recorded as the Second Battle of Bengaria. The first Battle of Bengaria took place on November 8, 2155, and saw the Romulans invade the system and destroy the NX-class Discovery, Starbase 1, and the Vulcan research outpost. The second battle took place on April 2, 2156. Archer gathered 13 ships and ordered them to retake the star system. The battle was mostly successful, with the Starfleet ships also deploying Mako ground units to the planet's surface. 7 Daedalus-class starships were destroyed. Later, in 2156, Archer would journey to the Klingon Empire to ask them to aid the United Earth forces against the Romulans. Archer's pleading to the Klingon Chancellor, Marek, was ultimately pointless, as the Klingons officially refused to assist Earth. It's around this time that the NX-01 Enterprise would be refit into the Columbia-class configuration. Fast forward to 2159, Archer and the Enterprise managed to save a Vulcan scientist known as Terrell from Romulan forces. This proved to be a mistake. Following the Vulcan's rescue, Archer found himself on a series of missions and learned that Terrell was responsible for many disasters in the Alpha Quadrant. This included infecting planets with toxins, destroying Starfleet facilities with the loss of crew members, and attempting to use toxins to destroy Earth. Archer and his task force ultimately forced the Vulcan into hiding. Another Starfleet captain would deal with her in the 23rd century. The events we mentioned here come from the Star Trek Legacy video game. Did you play this game? In 2160, Archer would command Starfleet forces at the Battle of Shran. This pivotal battle between the United Earth and the Romulans ended with a crushing defeat of the Romulan Star Empire. After the intense fighting and engagements, Starfleet and Captain Archer emerged victorious, thanks to the timely arrival of the Andorian, Tellarite, and Vulcan ships. However, the engagement ended badly for Enterprise, and the Starship would have to be towed home. Eventually, the Romulan War was over, and the USS Enterprise was officially decommissioned, mainly because its space frame was too compromised to function properly in the harsh reality of space. The events of the Earth-Romulan War, and Archer's role in this, are covered in the Star Trek Enterprise books Beneath the Raptor's Wing and To Brave the Storm. With decommissioning of Enterprise and the founding of the United Federation of Planets in 2161, Jonathan Archer would be promoted to the rank of Admiral. It was around this time that Archer was diagnosed with a decaying neurological damage, rendering him unfit to command another starship. Dr. Phlox determined that use of a transporter caused Archer's condition. Initially, he did not like being an Admiral, but he realized he could do much good in his new position for Starfleet and the newly established Federation. As of 2162, Archer had assigned the USS Endeavour to be his personal flagship. The ship would occasionally be used to meet leaders of other species on behalf of Starfleet and the Federation. His former first officer, T'Pol, had recently assumed command of the Endeavour, and was likely a factor in Archer selecting the starship. By 2164, thanks to the work of Dr. Phlox, Archer's neurological degeneration was mostly repaired. In March of that year, Admiral Archer would work with Commissioner Saval to begin negotiations with the Rigelian Trade Commission about joining the United Federation of Planets. During this, Archer would end up in a bit of a mess with a female Rigelian known as Director Hamask. She attempted to frame him and discredit the Admiral due to her family being held by a criminal organisation. Thankfully, Archer's name was cleared, and by the end of the year, the reformed Rigel system officially entered the Federation as the United Rigel World and Colonies. Around this time, Archer reconnected with his friend, Danica Erickson. The events here are from the novel Star Trek Enterprise, Tower of Babel. In 2156, Admiral Samuel Gardner retired from Starfleet and left the door open for Admiral Archer to succeed him as Chief of Staff. For 4 years, Archer oversaw many aspects of Starfleet and the Federation. However, he retired from Starfleet on January 1st, 2169. He would then go into diplomatic work, taking up the Federation ambassador position to Andoria, serving until 2175. Archer was then elected to the position of Federation Chancellor for the United Earth. Ultimately, Jonathan Archer would ascend to the presidency of the United Federation of Planets in 2185 and served 2 terms. That's the end of Archer's storyline. However, there is some unused information from a Star Trek Enterprise episode In a Mirror Darkly. This information would state that Archer died in his home in New York in 2245, one day after attending the christening of the USS Enterprise NCC 1701. An alternative image, which did not mention this, was used in the episode instead. What do you think of Archer's fate? Following Enterprise's return from its mission to the Delphic Expanse, T'Pol officially accepted a Starfleet commission at the rank of Commander. With the outbreak of the Earth-Romulan War in 2155, Captain Archer sent T'Pol to Vulcan to convince T'Pol to bring Vulcan fully into the Romulan War. Unfortunately, T'Pol was unsuccessful in convincing the Vulcans to join the fight against the Romulans. However, she did start an investigation into secretive arms shipments. T'Pol would return and serve on Enterprise for the rest of the war. T'Pol's mission can be read in the Romulan War novel Beneath the Raptor's Wing. Following the formation of the Federation in 2161, T'Pol was promoted to the rank of Captain and placed in command of the USS Endeavour. In the following years, she worked closely with Admiral Jonathan Archer, who, after his promotion, selected the Endeavour as his personal flagship. In September 2162, both Archer and T'Pol travelled together to a Tandarian colony world to investigate attacks on the colony. In 2163, T'Pol and the crew of the USS Endeavour played a crucial role in the Mute Crisis. T'Pol insisted that the Federation and Starfleet needed to come up with a peaceful solution, rather than starting another war. Finally, she was able to convince Admiral Shran, who approved of her plan. As such, both T'Pol and Lieutenant Commander Hoshi Sato surrendered themselves to the Mutes and were taken prisoner. Their goal was to communicate with them and convince them to stop their attacks. While a risky plan, it played off, and T'Pol would use a Vulcan mind meld to communicate with the species and forge a ceasefire with Vertians. This adventure is told through the Rise of the Federation novel, A Choice of Futures. It seems T'Pol would have a happy ending. By 2186, aged 98, T'Pol had resigned from Starfleet service and became an ambassador for the Federation. It's not stated if she was the Vulcan ambassador or someone else. She would return to live in her family's house on Vulcan, along with Mr. Tucker and their two children, Tamir and Lorian. Lieutenant Malcolm Reed was assigned to the NX-01 Enterprise under Captain Jonathan Archer in 2151. Fast forward to 2155, and with the increasing threat of a Romulan Star Empire, Mr. Reed would contact his Section 31 friend, Agent Harris, for help. Together the pair arranged for the apparent death of Commander Charles Tucker, Enterprise's chief engineer. The goal was for Tucker to gather information on the Romulan Warp 7 program for the organization. Due to Tucker's apparent death, Reed would become second officer of Enterprise, and in 2156 he was promoted to lieutenant commander. Reed played a vital role in the Earth-Romulan War, and served on Enterprise throughout the many battles the ship would find itself in. He would still be a part of the crew right up until the decommissioning of the ship and the founding of the Federation. Following Enterprise, Reed served aboard the USS Endeavour as Captain T'Pol's first officer. However, in 2162, he was promoted to captain and given command of the Intrepid-class USS Pioneer. Before departing the Endeavour, Dr. Phlox examined Mr. Reed and discovered the use of the transporter had caused severe damage to Reed's body, rendering him unable to have children. Mr. Reed would choose longtime friend, Travis Mayweather, as his first officer on board the Pioneer. He hoped Charles would be the bridge between himself and his new crew. Under Reed's command, the USS Pioneer would go on various missions for Starfleet and the Federation. On one occasion, Reed displayed his tactical command style. When Lieutenant Commander Mayweather's away team was surrounded on a new planet, he detonated a low-yield photonic torpedo in the planet's atmosphere to scare off the locals. While the plan worked, the Chief Medical Officer, Teresa Lau, objected strongly. The Wear Crisis kicked off in 2165. This was a series of military engagements that lasted most of the year. NX-01 Enterprise previously encountered Wear technology during their first voyage. This was the automated repair station technology, but also abducted crew members. The crisis kicked off in February 2165 when the Pioneer came into contact with a Wear trade station, which had abducted passengers from a local trade vessel. The Starfleet crew mounted a rescue, which resulted in the death of 4 Pioneer crew members. Admiral Archer and Captain Reed recruited Section 31 operative and former friend Charles Tucker for his engineering skills during this time. Tucker now went by the name Philip Collier because he technically died in 2161. Or was it 2155? The crisis would heat up, and the Federation went on the offensive against the Wear technology. In the same year, Tucker, still disguised as Chief Engineer Collier, argued with Malcom that the Wear medical technology could repair the damage to his reproductive system. Malcom would refuse, as he did not want to take advantage of the system for his own benefit, not when it cost the lives of so many species. The Wear crisis takes place in the Enterprise books, Uncertain Logic, and Live by the Code. In 2166, Captain Reed worked with Charles Tucker to expose Section 31. They had a breakthrough when Admiral Archer's executive assistant, Captain Marcus Williams, came forward with an official testimony about working for a clandestine organization. When Williams resigned, Archer reassigned Mr. Reed to be his new adjutant. The Pioneer was left in command of recently promoted Captain Caroline Paris, who Reed had recently begun a relationship with. These events are told in the book Patterns of Interference. That marks the end of Malcolm Reed's story in the Star Trek universe. Unfortunately, Enterprise's Travis Mayweather seemed to have a rough time with his fate. In 2155, following the destruction of the Earth cargo service freighter, Kobayashi Maru, yes that one, Travis felt he could no longer trust Captain Archer, so he departed Enterprise and joined the crew of the NX-class Discovery, NX-04. Unfortunately, with the outbreak of the Earth-Romulan War, the Discovery was destroyed over Bangaria 7 by the Romulans, though Travis and most of the crew managed to escape the ship before it was ultimately destroyed. Following this, Travis was assigned to the USS Yorktown, which was aboard during the Battle of Andorian in March 2156. Travis was seen as having abandoned the NX-01 Enterprise. As such, his image on board the Yorktown and reputation within Starfleet was generally tarnished. He was turned down for every posting he applied for within the fleet. Even the Yorktown crew considered Travis to be a bad luck charm. Eventually, Captain Weiss of the newly launched NX-05 Atlantis accepted his transfer. Mayweather finally felt at home on board Atlantis. By 2156, he had been promoted to the rank of lieutenant. Atlantis, along with the Coalition fleet, would be stationed at Tal Ceti 4, when a massive Romulan fleet entered and successfully took the system. Atlantis was stuck in the gravitational pull of Tal Ceti 3, and the crew were forced to abandon ship after Captain Weiss ordered a self-destruct. Travis and some of the crew were able to land on the planet's surface and await evacuation from Starfleet. In 2159, with the Earth-Romulan War raging, Travis was serving on board the Republic under Captain Jennings. He saw action during the Battle of Hokkaido, where he was injured but able to recover. Following the destruction of the USS Franklin Roosevelt in 2160, to which Travis would have been assigned, Archer offered him the helm of the NX-01 Enterprise once again. Travis would serve on board Enterprise throughout the remainder of the Earth-Romulan War until the ship's decommissioning. With the founding of the Federation, Mayweather joined former Enterprise shipmate Malcolm Reed as he took command of the USS Pioneer. Reed offered Travis the position of first officer aboard the Pioneer, and Travis was promoted to the rank of lieutenant commander. Mayweather served on the Pioneer for many years, being involved in many of the major events the Starship found itself in, including the Ware Crisis and assisting Admiral Archer on more than one occasion. You can explore some of these adventures in the Enterprise novels, Tower of Babel, and Uncertain Logic. By the 2240s, Mayweather had retired from Starfleet and taken command of a civilian Class J cargo tug. Named the SS New Rochelle, the tug would transport future Starfleet captain James T. Kirk along with a Layton family from Earth to Tarsus 4. Ensign Hoshi Sato joined the NX-01 Enterprise in 2151. In 2155, with the rise of the Romulan Star Empire threat, Sato felt her skills were not entirely useful on Enterprise and considered transporting off of the ship. Thankfully, Captain Archer managed to change her mind. Sato would serve on Enterprise during the Earth-Romulan War and begin a romantic relationship with Mako commander Major Takashi Kamau. She eventually left Enterprise along with everyone else following the ship's decommissioning and the founding of the Federation. By 2161, Sato had risen to Lieutenant Commander and served under Captain DePaul as the communications officer on board the USS Endeavour. Her partner, Kimaro, would also serve on board Endeavour as the armory officer. The Vertian crisis occurred in 2163, and Sato was ultimately responsible for attempting to communicate with the species. This conflict took place between March and April 2163, and involved the Vertians and several other nations, including the Federation. If you're unfamiliar with the species, they are known as the Alachi. This conflict arose when T'Pol and the Endeavour encountered the species and recognized them from Enterprise's earlier encounter with them. To see a peaceful resolution in the growing conflict, Hoshi Sato and T'Pol accompanied Vertian prisoners back to their ships. T'Pol, in the end, managed to mind meld with them and showed them they are sentient species. This is a very long-winded story, so I recommend you read this one for yourself. It takes place in the Enterprise novel, A Choice of Futures. In 2164, Sato was on board the Endeavour when it was dispatched to the Pegasi star system. Their mission was to settle a dispute between the Tellarite Starfleet Captain Brantic and the human colonists, who had set up a small settlement on one of the asteroids in the Tellarite claim system. Sato was instrumental in preventing the dispute becoming a bigger conflict. Later in life, Sato retired from Starfleet as a lieutenant commander. She would work on perfecting Lingo Code, the most critical element of the Universal Translator technology, which would become a staple of Starfleet for centuries to come. Sato eventually died sometime before 2268. Dr. Phlox remained aboard the NX-01 Enterprise during the Earth-Romulan War. However, following its conclusion and the founding of the Federation, Phlox was assigned to the Federation starship USS Endeavour under Captain DePaul. During his service on the Endeavour, family troubles rocked his career. While his daughter was due to marry an Antaran, the wedding was ruined when Phlox's son, Metis, murdered a popular figure among the Antaran people. This caused massive tensions between the Denobulan and Antaran peoples. The Denobulan government even considered extraditing Phlox's son. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed. This story is told in the rise of a Federation novel, Live by the Code. By the 2250s, Phlox had become a teacher at Starfleet Academy. In the early 2260s, Phlox resigned his position and went to do some exploring, at which point he would fill in as a temporary doctor on the planet Epsilon Zeta 7. It was here he would assist USS Enterprise Chief Medical Officer Dr. Leonard McCoy, along with Dr. Mbenga and Nurse Christine Chappell, in finding a cure to a virus that was infecting the Zeta 7 outpost. We presume Phlox had passed away at some point within the 23rd century. However, the Doctor's influence was widely known. For example, the Phlox Prize for Medicine had been named in his honour. Dr. Opheli Beck received his prize in 2241. By the year of 2376, a medical research facility had been named the Phlox Institute in his honour. Dr. Catherine Pulaski would serve there until at least 2379. By far, we're leaving the best man till last. Okay, mainly his Trip Tucker story is a little bit complicated due to the death. In Star Trek's extended canon, Tucker's death remained classified for 250 years. In reality, Tucker was forced to fake his death in 2155, just days before the foundation of the Coalition of Planets, which was the precursor to the United Federation of Planets. Star Trek extended canon argues with the established date here, but just keep following. Commander Tucker had actually been recruited by Section 31, the rogue spy agency. His mission was to infiltrate the space of a Romulan star empire and sabotage the Romulans' research into developing a Warp 7 star drive. To facilitate this, Tucker underwent reconstructive surgery to fit in behind enemy lines. Tucker and another Section 31 agent were the first humans to see the true appearance of the Romulan people and realize their kinship to the Vulcans. Section 31 would keep this information under wraps, fearing that if the link between the Vulcan and Romulan people were to be discovered, it would shatter the still fragile coalition of planets. Now here comes the confusion. At some point, the date of Tucker's apparent death was changed in the historical records. This new date of 2161 aligns with what we see in the Enterprise series finale episode, These Other Voyages. The Enterprise novel, The Good That Men Do, explores this further, and I highly suggest you give it a read. We've actually done a full breakdown on Tucker's survival here on the channel. You can check that out along with other Trek Central videos. Do enjoy, hopefully it gives more context to why Tucker faked his death. With the conclusion of the Earth-Romulan War, Tucker would return to Federation space. He would continue to assist Section 31. On one occasion, in 2163, Tucker worked with Admiral Archer to stop the Orion Syndicate from sabotaging the early efforts of the Federation. These events took place during the Vertian Crisis. At this point, Archer became increasingly uncomfortable with Trip's involvement in the Section 31 agency. Trip felt he had changed too much and refused to leave. During the Ware Crisis, Tucker took on the alias of Philip Collier and served as a temporary chief engineer aboard the USS Pioneer, under Captain Reed. Eventually, after learning that Section 31 had begun to work against the Federation's interests, Tucker left the organization. These adventures occur in the Enterprise novels, Uncertain Logic, and Live by the Code. By 2186, Tucker had assumed the name of Michael Kenmore. To ensure his secrecy, he had more cosmetic alterations done to his face. He and T'Pol had relocated to Vulcan by this point in time, where they eventually had two children, Tamir and Lorian. Most people believe that these children were of T'Pol and Kos's relationship. Tucker would now live with T'Pol at her ancestral home on Vulcan. These later adventures of Tucker are told through the Enterprise novels, To Brave the Storm and Last Full Measure. Here's a fun fact. The name Michael Kenmore references actor Connor Trinneer's character in Stargate Atlantis. To learn more about the Stargate universe, check out our Stargate Central channel, linked below. In the 23rd century, Tucker actually contributed to the design and development of the Constitution-class starship by leaving notes placed in the margins of the plans when the class was still in the design phase. One of Tucker's last recorded bits of information on his whereabouts was his visit to the Starfleet War Memorial, although the silent reflection he was looking for was made impossible by two young boys, Sam and James Kirk. Charles Tucker is the namesake of the Tucker Memorial Building on the grounds of Starfleet headquarters. In the 24th century, this building housed the offices of Starfleet's Corps of Engineers Command Liaison. Star Trek Enterprise answered a lot of questions during its short-lived 4-season run. But one question remains unanswered to this day. Who was the humanoid figure that was acting as a benefactor to the Suliban Cabal? The Star Trek fandom has always nicknamed him Future Guy, simply as we did know he was from the future. But we never knew his identity. Since the ending of Star Trek Enterprise, there have been many stories and suggestions telling us more about who this individual is. Let's explore them. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host Captain Jack, and let's get into it. Before we do warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from a team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay, engage. Let's talk about Star Trek canon first. This is everything we see on screen. Other explanations for the identity of Future Guy actually come from Star Trek's extended canon, which we'll touch on later in this video. From what we know early on, it's clear he was involved in the Temporal Cold War. For those who don't know, the Temporal Cold War was a harsh conflict fought between several time-travelling factions, all from different points in time. Each faction attempted to manipulate history for their own benefit, a clear violation of the Temporal Accords. These factions were known to use proxy powers to carry out their missions. As such, the Suliban Cabal benefactor used the Suliban Cabal under Silik to do his bidding and influence major events within the Alpha Quadrant. He strongly opposed the Federation and its predecessor, the United Earth, going to such lengths as attempt to frame Earth's first Warp 5 starship, Enterprise, for a disaster they never committed. While the Cabal benefactor worked against the United Earth, and by extension the Federation, he did occasionally help them, if not indirectly. In 2153, after Earth suffered a devastating attack at the hands of a Xindi, he had the Suliban Silik retrieve Captain Jonathan Archer and bring him to his temple chamber, where he provided Archer with the intelligence that the Xindi were the ones behind the attack, thus leading Starfleet to launch a mission to stop the Xindi. Ultimately, he was serving his own interests once again, as the Xindi were being used by another Temporal Cold War faction, the Sphere Builders. Approximately 1 year later in 2154, he ordered Silik to stir away on the Enterprise once again, this time because he knew that Temporal Agent Daniels would be sending the Enterprise back in time to 1944. Daniels sent the Enterprise back in time as he wanted Archer and his crew to stop another Temporal Cold War faction, the Nakaal, who were constructing a temporal conduit, which would have given them the ability to physically travel through time. The Future Guy wanted the specifications for his use during the Temporal Cold War. Ultimately, this plan failed, as Silik was discovered and later killed while Archer helped stop the Nakaal. With Silik's death, the story of our Cabal benefactor stops here in official Star Trek canon. We still don't really know much about him. We know he's from the future, but have no name or even species. To learn more about this character, we need to dive into the extended Star Trek lore, so let's take a look. So the extended Star Trek lore gives us an immediate information about the Cabal benefactor. His name is Jamran Honoff, a founding member of the Order of Omega. The Order of Omega was a revivalist eugenics movement in the 28th century. It mostly used time travel in an attempt to reshape the timeline to a more desirable outcome, even genetically manipulating species such as the Suliban. It's worth noting that the Suliban Cabal was not the only faction for which he acted as a benefactor. In fact, he existed countless factions across time and throughout the galaxy as we know it. Commonly, Honoff would provide genetic enhancements in exchange for species loyalty. During the 24th century, his downfall began. He recruited members of the Romulan species who were so loyal to him that they were willing to die for his cause. Eventually, Shran, a descendant of the Suliban Cabal and also an agent of the Federation Department of Temporal Investigations, attempted to discover the origin of his messages to these Romulans. Honoff detected her and had her surgically removed from the timeline. Unfortunately for him, he was too late, as she had transmitted enough of her data so that someone could discover him. Honoff fled to the 22nd century to hide, but he was apprehended by Agent Daniels at long last. Eventually, he was detained and questioned by agents from 3 separate time periods. Honoff finally revealed that during his reign of time manipulation, he had affected so many different races, all because he wanted to alter history to benefit the Omegians. Shockingly, he was also a descendant of the Suliban, Romulan and Tellarite races, so he had committed his actions to ensure his own existence. Timelines do be funny. After a lengthy interrogation, which did take some time, he was tried for his crimes in the 31st century, receiving a fairer trial than he would have had in his own time. Given that Star Trek Discovery reveals that Dr. Kovich is in fact Agent Daniels, it stands to reason these events would have taken place before the Burn event, which crippled the Federation and the wider galaxy. Well, that's the story of Jamran Honoff, aka the Cabal benefactor, aka the Future Guy. Now interestingly enough, his story would have taken a different turn in the official canon if Star Trek Enterprise had a Season 5. It never got the Season 5, so for the moment, the extended canon is all we know. But luckily for us, Enterprise executive producer Brannon Braga gave fans an answer to who he would have been. So let's quickly explore that. Before I do go into this, I personally would consider the extended canon the story of a humanoid benefactor, as what Bran and Braga says here is not a fully fleshed out story. However, I'll leave it for you to decide, and you can let me know what you think in the comment section below. When Enterprise was on our screens, executive producers Rick Berman and Bran and Braga invented the character of a Cabal benefactor without actually deciding on who his identity was at the time. They did this because they wanted to introduce a villain who didn't want the human species to succeed and become the Federation we all know. Due to no one knowing who his character was, he picked up the fan favourite name of Future Guy, or the humanoid figure as he was referred to in the Enterprise episode scripts. Eventually, the writers wanted to reveal his identity in the first season finale, Shockwave, but decided against it. Bran and Braga stated that doing so just seemed too soon and he did not serve as the story. Fan theories ran wild during Enterprise's runtime, with many theorizing that the character of the Future Guy had to be someone who was already established on screen, leading many to believe that he would be Jonathan Archer. This fan theory was sort of correct in a way. In 2012, Bran and Braga revealed to Trek fans on his Twitter that if Enterprise had a 5th season of the show, it would have revealed a Future Guy to be Jonathan Archer, who would have been trying to correct history and also be trying to repair a corrupt future by influencing his younger self. Braga revealed that Archer being a Future Guy was his grand plan from the beginning, and the idea of Future Guy being a Romulan was a red herring. We all know Star Trek Enterprise's Mr. Reed is the no-nonsense tactical officer who is super loyal to Captain Jonathan Archer. But what really happened to him? With Star Trek Enterprise being cut short when the series ended so abruptly, we never got to finish the storyline of some of these characters. In today's Star Trek video, we dive into the Star Trek universe to explore the fate of Captain Malcolm Reed. Yes, he made Captain. Let's go. Welcome to Trek Central. I'm your host Captain Jack, and let's get into it. Before we do warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay, engage. As a quick disclaimer, today's video will contain information from the many books on the Star Trek universe, but as they have no visual content, we will simply use reference footage from Star Trek Enterprise. Enjoy! Oh, and I've also linked the books down below. We start the story around the time when the series of Star Trek Enterprise ended, the threat of a Romulan war looming over and Starfleet starting to really worry about the Romulan Star Empire. A plan was hatched. Mr. Reed, who was serving aboard the NX-01 Enterprise still, contacted his Section 31 friend, we use that term loosely, Agent Harris. They arranged the apparent death of Chief Engineer, Commander Charles Trip Tucker III. We've covered Trip's death in another YouTube video here on the channel. We'll include a link to that at the end of this video. The purpose of Trip's death was so that he could go undercover for Section 31, to gather intelligence on the Romulan Warp 7 program for Section 31. The agency would then decide what to do with it. On the plus side, with Tucker's departure from Enterprise, it allowed Reed a promotion to Second Officer, as well as a promotion to Lieutenant Commander in late 2156. The events surrounding the storyline are told through the Enterprise novel To Brave the Storm. We've linked in the video description and highly suggest you read it. The Earth-Romulan War soon started, throwing Earth and many worlds into the chaos of a ravaging war with an enemy that would not stop. The climactic Battle of Shran tested the entire crew of the NX-01 Enterprise, including Mr. Reed. Captain Archer led Enterprise and a task force of 24 ships to attack the Romulan military base and staging grounds at Shran, taking on 81 ships in the process. Enterprise fought hard and at one point, along with the USS Atlantis, destroyed the IRW Koto and disabled the IRW Chula as they attempted to withdraw. Lieutenant Commander Reed would serve on board Enterprise throughout the war, until the ship's decommissioning in the year 2160. This was shortly before the founding of the United Federation of Planets in 2161. Mr. Reed would go on to serve on board the newly refitted USS Endeavour, a Columbia-class starship. He served on board as Captain DePaul's first officer. During his time on board the ship, he was promoted to the rank of captain, and would take command of the Intrepid-class starship, the USS Pioneer. Shortly before he took command, Dr. Phlox gave Reed a physical examination. It revealed that the use of the transporter systems, which were installed throughout the fleet, had caused severe damage to Reed's reproductive organs, making it ill-advised for him to ever have children. As he was a reclusive person who typically formed new relationships slowly, Reed chose his longtime friend, Travis Mayweather, to be his new first officer on board the Pioneer. It was hoped that Travis could bridge the gap between the captain and the crew. 1 year later, in 2163, the Pioneer was ordered to investigate Hansen's planet and its native primitive life forms, known as the Homo Hassoni. The away team mission quickly went sideways, when Lieutenant Commander Mayweather's away team was backed into a corner by the natives. Reed would refuse to carry out an emergency transport. Instead, former tactical officer detonated a low-yield photonic torpedo in the planet's atmosphere to scare off the locals. Thankfully, the away team returned to their shuttle pod reasonably unharmed. The Pioneer's chief medical officer, Teresa Lau, confronted Captain Reed about his actions. Likely, she was concerned about the medical ramifications of a photonic detonation in the atmosphere. During the months of March and April in 2163, Captain Reed oversaw the efforts by Dr. Tobin Dax to integrate various new Federation technology aboard the ship. The Pioneer would go under a series of trials to test the new technology that was being installed. For example, during one of the engine trials, the Pioneer accidentally created an unstable wormhole with the use of the ship's warp drive. It became trapped in the atmosphere of a super Jovian planet, which had a strong radiation belt. In response to the disaster, Captain Reed had the crew take shelter in the starboard catwalk for protection. The Pioneer's engineers attempted to repair the ship's propulsion systems. When it looked as if the engineers would not be able to fix the ship in time, Reed held a very close talk with his crew. It was around this time that Captain realised that he used Travis as a shield rather than a bridge to deal with his own problems. Captain Reed would inform his crew that he was proud of every one of them, and that he would try and become a more approachable captain. When it looked like all hope was lost, Reed approved a daring plan from his science officer. The plan was to contact a species of cloud whales and ask for help. Thankfully for the Pioneer's crew, the creatures did indeed help. They used their bodies to prevent the Pioneer from sinking deeper into the planet's atmosphere until they could finish engine repairs and escape intact. Following their near-death adventure, Reed returned with the Pioneer to Earth. During a layover, Admiral Archer and Captain T'Pol would join Reed for dinner on board the Pioneer. The trio recounted the recent adventures they'd all experienced. The adventures here are told in the Enterprise novel A Choice of Futures. Later in October 2163, the Pioneer would find itself dealing with a distress call from a Laurelian freighter. When Reed and the ship arrived on the scene, they thankfully managed to rescue 4 survivors, only to learn Klingon privateers attacked them. While Pioneer's Lieutenant Valeria Williams insisted they should pursue, Reed decided not, feeling that the Laurelians needed more help. Following these events, the Pioneer continued to operate in friendly space on a number of missions. In May 2164, Admiral Jonathan Archer rerouted the Pioneer to the Rigel system. Their mission was a cultural exchange following their former request for the Federation membership. While the Pioneer was able to provide as any assistance it could, Admiral Archer secretly charged Mr. Reed with uncovering some secrets that the Rigelians were reluctant to talk about. This included their Trade Commission security policies, the criminal organizations, and the native species of Kalar on Rigel 7. 2 of Reed's officers, Lieutenant Samuel Kirk and Ensign Bodar Chimgrev, were soon abducted during the theft of the vital RTC secrets on Rigel 5. Captain Reed ordered a full investigation and contacted Admiral Archer. To assist in matters, Archer dispatched the USS Endeavour under the command of Captain T'Pol to provide help. While investigating, the Starfleet officers found a suspicious abundance of leads that they had no choice but to follow them. When the Endeavour eventually arrived, Reed felt that Archer had sent T'Pol out of concern for his command abilities. However, Captain T'Pol soon reassured him that he had nothing to worry about and that he should trust his crew. In 9 days of searching and following multiple leads, Lieutenant Williams finally provided the key to solve the mystery. It seems the armory officer was rescued from captivity by Dula Garos after he betrayed the First Families, the crime syndicate. While Archer and T'Pol had reservations about trusting information obtained from Garos, Reed heeded his former captain's advice and trusted Williams' judgment. After some preparation, they conducted a successful raid on the asteroid mining complex where Kirk and Grev were being held, and recovered the officers and the stolen files. This story would be told for the Enterprise novel, Tower of Babel. In 2165, the Pioneer was a part of a Starfleet task force dealing with the Ware. You'd be familiar with the Ware and who they are if you watched Star Trek Enterprise. The Ware were the species who built the automated ship repair yard seen in the Enterprise episode Dead Stop. In February 2165, the USS Pioneer was charged with exploring new territories previously inaccessible because of the Romulans and the Vertians. After entering a new region of space, the Pioneer encountered the same type of automated station that the NX-01 Enterprise had discovered 13 years ago. After the Pioneer crew discovered that the Menaic ship, the Leave, was docked to a repair station, Reed contacted them and decided to warn the ship's crew about the dangers the station possessed. This led to the reveal that the native species in this region of space called the station's technology the Ware, and they had been dependent on the technology for generations. Under Captain Reed's orders, an away team would infiltrate the repair station and successfully rescue 2 people. One of them was the Menaic passenger named Nymphu, who had been abducted from a ship. However, during this, the away team lost crewman Filton Detzel. Following the mission, Pioneer targeted the Ware station and destroyed it. The ship then set a course for Menaic homeworld to drop off their rescued passenger. During the trip, the Pioneer was intercepted by a Ware battleship. The battleship made short work of the Pioneer and disabled a Federation starship. During this, it took back the 2 liberated prisoners. The attack left Pioneer crippled, with the warp engines too severely damaged to be repaired. She also suffered multiple casualties. Starfleet Command dispatched the USS Theresa Vey to tow her back to Vulcan Space Central for repairs. After the USS Pioneer was repaired, she joined a Starfleet task force personally led by Admiral Archer into Ware territory. The mission was to learn anything they could about the species and eliminate any threat to the Federation without starting another war. The Earth-Romulan war had already cost both sides so much that no one really wanted another prolonged conflict. Engineer Tobin Dax decided to depart the USS Pioneer around this time. The temporary replacement was Engineer Philip Collier, who was actually Trip Tucker in disguise. Collier led a team of experts from Abramson Industries. Again, you can check out our full video on how Trip Tucker survived and what he was doing in disguise in our video here on the Trek Central channel. It's linked in the video description and I'll be at the end of this video. Alongside the other Starfleet ships, the Pioneer spent months searching for information in the region of space. Most of the Starfleet task force remained at the edge of the sector. During their search, the crew of the Pioneer visited several worlds, including the Kyra homeworld. During their visit, they learned how the Ware used innocent people to suit their needs. It sometimes drove species to extinction. However, they still failed to learn who created the Ware, where to find them, or their real goals. Eventually, the Pioneer crew learned about the location of a Ware hub complex. With the aid of the Starfleet task force, the Pioneer and other ships were able to take the facility. After securing the facility, the Pioneer dispatched a team of engineers to shut down the Ware. This mission was interrupted by a sizable force of Ware battleships, which had arrived to retake the complex. 2 individuals led the battleships from Van Ott, who had captured Travis Mayweather. These individuals wanted to take control of the Ware for their own uses. Pioneer and the Starfleet task force engaged the battleships to buy time for the away team on the station. Collier, aka Tucker, was able to access the Ware software with the help from Travis Mayweather, and the Ware was shut down, saving the heavily damaged task force and freeing countless prisoners from Ware captivity. As such, the Ware crisis was put to an end once and for all. The storyline here is told through the Enterprise novel Uncertain Logic. Following the conclusion of the Pioneer's mission into Ware space, Captain Reed and the crew returned to Earth for repair and refit. During this time, Captain Reed met a fellow Starfleet officer named Caroline Paris, and the two became very close. Yes, this is the same Paris family that Tom Paris, of the USS Voyager, is a part of. Small world. In the following weeks, as the Pioneer was still being repaired and refitted to Earth, Reed worked closely with his old friend, Charles Tucker, to expose Section 31 for what it really was. In early 2166, the pair had a breakthrough, when Admiral Jonathan Archer's executive assistant, Captain Marcus Williams, came forward with an official testimony about working for the clandestine organisation. Williams resigned his commission due to his involvement with Section 31. As such, Admiral Archer reassigned Captain Reed to be his new adjutant. The USS Pioneer was put under the command of a freshly promoted Captain Caroline Paris, who Mr. Reed had begun a romantic relationship with. That's the end of Mr. Reed's story. Unlike some characters, there is no definitive ending to his storyline, which is sometimes good. It's less depressing. For the most part, the Vulcans were a peaceful people, but in a galaxy as dangerous as Star Trek's, non-violence isn't always an option. Before Starfleet took over the defense of Vulcan and its neighbours, the Vulcan High Command oversaw a substantial fleet of combat-ready starships, the largest and most impressive of which was the Vulcan-class combat cruiser. These Leviathans could serve as command ships in wartime and science vessels in peacetime, and they dwarfed any starship humanity had built up until that point. In the mid-22nd century, the Vulcan-class was the most powerful starship in the Vulcan fleet, and in this video, we'll be taking a closer look at its specifications and operational history. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. We're enjoying making these Star Trek videos, and we hope you're enjoying watching them. If you want to support their development, check out our Patreon via the link below. We've got a handy bunch of rewards, so check them out and any support is greatly appreciated. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Oh, and while you're watching, what would you name a Vulcan starship if you were to command one? Get thinking, because it's kind of different than Starfleet ships. Comment down below. Okay, engage. It's unknown when exactly the Vulcan-class combat cruiser was designed, But at the latest, numerous ships of the class were active in the Vulcan fleet by the mid-22nd century. Prior to the Vulcan reformation in 2154, these ships operated the orders of the Vulcan High Command, which oversaw the Vulcan Confederacy's military and scientific fleets. The Tellarite-class most famously functioned as a warship, but vessels of this class were also deployed for scientific expeditions and other peacetime missions, similar to the science-orientated but combat-ready vessels of the future Federation Starfleet. The Tellarite-class combat cruiser, as well as other Vulcan ships of the type, had prominent aesthetic and technological differences from contemporary human designs. These included copper-tinted hull plating, arrowhead or needle-like designs, and the use of annular warp rings instead of warp nacelles. Vulcan warp rings function similar to human warp nacelles, despite their substantial differences in appearances. Relative to contemporary human ships, the Tellarite and its cousins tended to be faster and armed with advanced sensors and weapons, but were still beyond humanity's understanding. At 600 meters long, the Tellarite-class combat cruiser was enormous for a 22nd century vessel. It had a dagger-like shape, flat and narrow at the fore, but flared out further aft. The aft end of the ship was wide and rounded, with a small engine block at the very back, and it featured a massive circular cutaway in the hull. This hull contained the cruiser's warp ring, which is usually orientated vertically, perpendicular to the rest of the ship. On the forward end, this hull also featured a narrow docking strut, where a large, needle-shaped auxiliary craft were docked when not in use. The Tellarite-class combat cruiser was propelled by a pair of impulse engines, which were located at the very aft end of the ship in a small module aft of the warp ring. The warp ring itself was one of the largest and most recognizable features of the ship, containing the cruiser's warp coils, which were connected to a warp core located elsewhere within the ship. The warp drive of the Tellarite-class starship was quite powerful for its time, with a top speed of warp 7, much faster than humanity's NX-class starships, which were only capable of warp 5. Unlike the warp rings of most Vulcan starships, which were fixed in place in a vertical position, the Tellarite's warp ring could change orientation. During ordinary spaceflight, or when the warp drive was in use, the ring was arrayed vertically, but when the ship was powered down, docked at a space station, or was preparing to launch or retrieve its auxiliary craft, the warp ring rotated to a horizontal position. In the horizontal inactive position, the warp ring fit snugly into the walls of the hull that dominated the Tellarite's aft section. The Tellarite-class cruiser was likely incapable of conducting planetary landings, and whilst the auxiliary craft was capable of atmospheric flight, it's unknown if the cruiser itself was. On the inside, the Tellarite-class combat cruiser was divided into at least 13 fairly spacious decks. Crew quarters were located along the sides of the cruiser's midsection, where the Tellarite's only viewports were located. In total, the Tellarite's crew consisted of 147 personnel. Amidships, these decks intersected the cruiser's shuttle bay, which spanned all of the Tellarite's decks. There was a small sick bay with a single biobed on deck 5, as well as an auxiliary control room on the engineering deck. The auxiliary control room was meant to be used if the main bridge and engine room of the Tellarite class were inaccessible or out of commission, and it was protected by security systems that would flood the room with hexafluorine gas if seized by hostile boarders. The main bridge of the Tellarite was located towards the very front of the ship on the highest deck, atop a teardrop-shaped bump on the dorsal hull. The bridge appeared to be very simple in design, but it was never seen in full. As a combat ship, the Tellarite was designed for battle, being heavily armed and equipped with powerful defences. Unlike Earth's starships, the Tellarite-class combat cruiser was equipped with powerful deflector shields, and its copper-coloured hull was likely heavily armoured as well. The ship's sensors were far more sophisticated than any human equivalents, as was the Tellarite's tractor beam. This tractor beam was only one of the cruiser's weapons, which also included particle beams and photonic weapons, like photon torpedoes of some variety. The Tellarite boasts at least 6 particle beam emitters. These include 2 aft emitters, 1 to either side of the impulse drives, 2 ventral emitters, 1 fore and 1 midsection, and a single forward emitter, and at least 1 dorsal emitter located just aft of the bridge. The Tellarite had firepower comparable to an Andorian battlecruiser, and it was the Vulcan's most heavily armed starship. The aforementioned shuttle bay of the Tellarite-class combat cruiser usually carried at least 2 shuttles of unknown classification. The Tellarite also carried an auxiliary starship, which docked into a narrow strut that extended out into the hull of the aft section of the cruiser. This auxiliary ship is identified in Star Trek Online as the Vulcan-class support craft, and it was an interesting ship in its own right. Measuring at 180 meters in length, the Tellarite's main hull was needle-like, though flat on its ventral side, and featured a smaller warp ring, which was fixed in a vertical position, which was towards its aft end. The warp ring hung underneath the main hull of the ship, and it also connected to the Taukeir's smaller ventral hull, which was also needle-shaped and connected to the main hull by a diagonal beam. The Taukeir could serve as mothership as a large personnel transport, a reconnaissance vessel, or as a combat support vessel. It required a crew of 25, including 2 bridge officers. The Taukeir was propelled by a set of impulse thrusters located at the aft end of the main hull, and it also had its own warp ring, the capabilities of which are currently unknown. Its warp ring did allow the Taukeir to operate at significant range from the mothership. The Taukeir-class support craft was equipped with deflector shields, and was armed with a plasma weapon and photon torpedoes. These allowed the Taukeir to provide its mothership with fire support during combat, but its main combat role was more unique. Per Star Trek Online, the Taukeir's intended combat purpose was to project structural integrity fields onto damaged vessels, whether being its mothership or a different ship, helping them remain intact for longer in combat. In combat, the Dekeir-class combat cruisers served as a command ship and frontline battleships for Vulcan forces. They were capable of orbital bombardment, and they also fared well against many contemporary capital ships due to their extensive firepower. Dekeir-class cruisers were the core of the Vulcan fleet, and when the Vulcans went to war, these Leviathans would lead the charge. Dekeir-class combat cruisers were also deployed for scientific missions, such as charting thermobaric clouds in the Delphic Expanse, as well as for diplomatic missions. During the early 2150s, the Dekeir served the Vulcan High Command in numerous missions, bombarding part of Vulcan in an attempt to destroy the Serenite sect, and carrying an attack on Andoria. After the Vulcan reformation of 2154, the new Vulcan government deployed Dekeir-class cruisers as part of a joint operation with Earth, the Tellarites, and the Andorians to destroy a Romulan drone ship. The Dekeir-class starship later fought in the Earth-Romulan War on the side of Earth, before the Vulcans kindly withdrew from the conflict. After Vulcan joined the Federation, the Dekeir-class combat cruiser remained in use, but only for planetary defense and scientific vessels. The Vulcans continued to use them for centuries, regularly retrofitting the ships with new technology. This allowed the Dekeir to remain in use even into the 25th century, although by this point they were almost exclusively used as scientific vessels. Though it first appeared in Shockwave Part 2, the premiere of Star Trek Enterprise's second season, the Dekeir-class combat cruiser was originally designed for the next episode, Carbon Creek. It was originally meant to represent the Deval, a 20th century Vulcan starship, which would deploy a small rescue ship to rescue survivors from a crashed scout ship. For the final version of Carbon Creek, the Deval became a completely different ship based on the rescue ship, while the original design for it became the Vulcan warship we all know and love. Some aspects of the Dekeir's original role remain in the final design, however, most notably, the Taukeir support craft, which was originally meant to be the deployable rescue craft. The Dekeir was designed by John Eves, who had previously designed the Vulcan starship to plan a half for Star Trek First Contact. Eves closely followed the design language of the existing Vulcan starships for the Dekeir, giving the new cruiser the Deplanner half's copper hull colouring, and the Suurok-class's ring-shaped warp drive. The latter design element came from Doug Drexler, and it was inspired by a rejected piece of concept for the original series' USS Enterprise. John Eves also designed the Dekeir's auxiliary craft, then a small rescue vessel, first, followed by the cruiser itself. Both vessels drew heavily on the design of the Suurok-class, with Eves' main innovations being the deployable auxiliary craft and the rotating warp ring. After concept art for the Dekeir-class cruise was approved by the producers, it fell to VFX artist Pierre Droulet to build a CGI model of the ship. At some point during the latter stages of this process, plans for Carbon Creek changed, and a new concept of the Deval was approved. The Enterprise's season premiere required a Vulcan warship, the Dekeir, to rendezvous with Enterprise, and so the design was reused for this role. The Dekeir-class cruiser went on to appear in 10 episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, primarily in Season 4. All interior shots for the ship were custom built for the Season 3 episode Impulse, consisting of mostly of an H-shaped corridor and a multi-purpose room. The bridge of the Dekeir was previously seen, albeit only partially, in the Season 2 episode Ceasefire. Star Trek Enterprise may be a love or hate show for some Trekkies, but there's no denying that the series introduced some fantastic starship designs, not only for humanity, but also for the other alien races. We'll have to talk about the Vulcan fleet another day, because today we're shining a light on the Andorian battlecruiser known as the Kumari, which was placed under the command of Commander Shran. The ship was seen alongside the NX-01 Enterprise on more than one occasion, as well as playing a role in helping save Earth from the Xindi crisis of 2154. How did the ship come about? Before the Kumari came on screen in Enterprise Season 3, we had not really seen much of the Andorian fleet on screen in Star Trek. In today's Trek Central Starship Breakdown, we beam down to check out the Andorian battlecruiser. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. Before we warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay, engage. The Andorian Battlecruiser came into a length of 360 meters. For context, the NX-01 Enterprise was around 225 meters in length. The hull of the Kumari-class Battlecruiser was made of duranium alloy. The hull configuration consisted of an engineering section with two weapon/engine pods mounted on wing-like pylons. The shuttle and cargo bays were placed on the central hull. Meanwhile, a dart-like saucer section would house additional crew decks as well as the main bridge of the ship. Speaking of the cargo bays, the vessel contained at least 3 bays. The third seemed to be the main bay and was located on the ventral section of the ship, near the centre of the vessel. Force field shielded the bays from radiation. Tactical system-wise, the Kumari-class ships were equipped with particle cannon weapons, reflector shields, and a powerful tractor beam capable of towing some vessels. The class did seem to lack torpedo launchers. 5 of the particle cannon emitters were positioned on the fore, port, starboard, ventral, and dorsal hulls. Each of the emitters would have a 180-degree firing arc, allowing for the ship to have great reach in tactical situations. While the deflector shields allowed for strong defense for a ship of that era, the lack of polarized hull plating did leave the hull weaker than would be expected. The ship was designed for war, mainly because the Andorians were on the brink of war with species such as the Vulcans and the Tellarites. The ship was capable of speeds in excess of Warp 5 and features a matter-antimatter reactor for propulsion. A Kumari-class battlecruiser typically had around 86 personnel assigned. The tactical focus and speed of a Kumari-class made it a match for the Vulcan class warship. In case of emergency, the ship was equipped with escape pods. The interior design of a Kumari-class was clean and modern. 5 officers typically crewed the main bridge of a battlecruiser, and the commanding officer would sit in the command chair. Like Federation ship designs, the officer stations were visible to the commander. Officers on the bridge of his vessel typically included the executive officer, navigators, and flight controllers. A ready room for use by the ship's commanding officer was located off of the bridge. At least one of these battlecruisers, the Kumari, had an interrogation room. This was a small room that contained one interrogation chair and controls to operate the technology. There was a machine that created a neurosynaptic field which could lower a victim's emotional threshold rather than cause physical discomfort. The ever-evolving political landscape of interstellar affairs demanded new starship designs. As such, the Andorian Empire officially launched the Imperial Guard ship, Kumari, in 2142. As the first of her class, we refer to the Andorian battlecruiser as the Kumari-class Battlecruiser. In the same year as her launch, the ship was placed under the command of Commander Shran. The ship was actually named after the first ice cutter to circumvent and navigate the planet of Andoria. Due to the Andorians' feud with the Vulcans, more and more of the Kumari-class battlecruisers were built and launched by the Imperial Guard. In December 2153, the Kumari entered the region of space known as the Delphic Expanse, in search of the Earth ship Enterprise. Under the command of Shran, the Andorian vessel spent several weeks following the Enterprise's warp trail. The battlecruiser finally caught up with the NX-01 and rendered assistance in capturing the Xindi prototype weapon. However, while the gesture seemed like good faith towards humanity, it was eventually discovered that the Andorians intended to take the Xindi prototype for themselves. Enterprise Captain Jonathan Archer prevented Commander Shran from doing so. He remotely armed the Xindi weapon, which was docked within the Kumari, and threatened to detonate it. Shran did not back down, and Archer activated the detonation sequence. Thankfully, the Kumari escaped the destruction but did sustain heavy damage. In February 2154, the Kumari detected the finished Xindi weapon en route to Earth through a subspace vortex. Intending to repair human-Andorian relations, Commander Shran took the Kumari and followed the Xindi weapon. This proved to be a success, as the battlecruiser arrived shortly after the weapon and the Xindi Degra's personal starship. Shran continued to aid the mission of destroying the Xindi weapon by providing covering fire for Degra's ship against Commander Dolim's Xindi reptilian warships. Shran and the Kumari's distraction allowed Captain Archer to beam himself and an away team on board the Xindi weapon and destroy it, ultimately saving Earth. While Archer fought his way aboard the weapon, the Kumari continued to engage Dolim's command ship and ultimately destroyed it by targeting and firing on the ship's unshielded starboard engine. Late in the year of 2154, the Kumari was assigned to lead a covert task force of 5 warships inside a nebula. Once again under Shran, her mission was to monitor local space. At least 3 of the other warships assisting the Kumari all appeared to be Kumari-class battlecruisers. They seemed to be in the same configuration as the Kumari, and likely were new versions of the ship. Under the command of acting Captain Tucker, the NX-1 Enterprise soon arrived and sought to warn the Andorians and Shran of the Vulcans' intent to invade Andoria. Enterprise was able to locate the Kumari with the help of Vulcan Ambassador Saval. Shran did not trust Saval, but eventually agreed to pass the information to the Imperial Guard. The Guard eventually agreed to redeploy the fleet of Andorian ships, along with the Enterprise. Just before this, Commander Shran did kidnap Ambassador Saval for a quiet chat aboard the Kumari. The Andorian fleet, assisted by Enterprise, was victorious in holding off a dozen Vulcan cruisers in the Battle of Andoria, which took place on the outskirts of the Andorian system. The Andorian and human fleet were able to hold off the Vulcan ships long enough for Captain Archer, who was on Vulcan, to provide enough information to the Vulcan High Command that led to the removal of Administrator Velas. The Kumari, Enterprise, and several other ships sustained damage but ultimately survived. In November 2154, the Kumari escorted the Andorian ambassador to a trade conference on Babel. During this escort mission, the ship was attacked by what appeared to be a Tellarite vessel. Unfortunately, the Kumari sustained critical damage and was ultimately destroyed during the engagement. Thankfully, Commander Shran and Lieutenant Talas made it to the escape pods and evacuated in time. Enterprise later rescued the survivors. Only 19 of the 86 crew members escaped the ship's destruction. It was later revealed that the Romulan drone ship was responsible for destroying the Andorian Battlecruiser. In Star Trek's extended canon, the Kumari-class starship would continue to serve the Andorian Empire for years to come following the loss of Kumari. Kumari-class battlecruisers would later participate in the Earth-Romulan War. Unfortunately, due to a confederacy of Vulcan convincing the Andorian Empire to drop out of a war, the coalition of planets was eventually dissolved and the Andorians withdrew. With the founding of the United Federation of Planets, the Kumari-class starships were still the mainstay of the Andorian Guard. They would take up the mantle of the defense arm of the new Federation Starfleet from 2161 onwards. For example, in 2163, a task force led by the USS Vinkafen included several of these ships. In Star Trek Online, which takes place in its own storyline during the 25th century, Starfleet produced several new starship classes to defend the Federation against new threats. During the Federation Klingon War of 2405 to 2410, Andorian supplied Starfleet with 3 escort classes. These designs were based on the original Kumari-class, but heavily redesigned for use in modern settings. These new ships included a heavily redesigned Kumari-class vessel launched in 2409. The other 2 ships were subclasses, including the Sharal and Kaizon. The design of these 3 escort types was modular, which allowed each design to share pieces of the other. Following severe attacks on Earth's space dock by Species 8472 in 2410, the Imperial Guard vessel Kaizon was stationed at Earth. In one of Star Trek's many alternative timelines, in which the Vulcans had remained a violent and emotional species, General Shran commanded the Kumari during the Xindi crisis. When the Xindi targeted Andoria for destruction, Shran responded and used the Kumari to carpet bomb the planet of Xindus into submission. In the 23rd century, the commander of the IUES Kumari-2 would create a display of his ship's 7 predecessors in the new briefing room, including the IGV Kumari. Legendary Star Trek concept artist John Eves would be given the task of designing the Kumari-class Andorian battlecruiser. As we know, the Andorians had been around for decades before they actually finally got a ship of their own in the Star Trek universe. The Kumari-class would make its first appearance in the Enterprise episode Ceasefire. Eves would go on to mention that although the Andorian species first appeared in 1967, he had very little to work on when it came to creating a ship for them. During his interview with the Hero Collector magazine, Eves said, "A lot of times, I tried to do a retro version of what we'd seen before, but we'd never seen an Andorian ship, so it was open for me to figure out what we wanted to do." As you can see on screen, Eves would go on to sketch various design alternatives on a single piece of paper. This was done so the Star Trek Enterprise producers had something to choose from. Initially, we can see Eves wanted to go with a more organic manta ray approach. There was even a suggestion of antennae as a nod to the famous Andorian makeup design. Eves notes that he was surprised when the producers chose a much thinner, rocket-like design. The design process led to the final design having 2 distinctive inspirations, one being a World War II seaplane and the other being Battlestar Galactica. This came to be as it was around the same time that the reimagined series of Battlestar Galactica was starting up. Speaking of which, if you like Battlestar Galactica, then head over to the Hangar Bay YouTube channel to check out the Battlestar Galactica ship breakdowns we've recently done. John Eves also revealed that the pontoons of an old aircraft inspired the Kumari's engines and wings. It seems a lot of his inspiration came from an old World War II aeroplane. Eves recounted how his visit to the Phoenix Air Museum led him to discover the airplane called the Mariner, which had a double-jointed wing. Once Eves' final sketch was approved, it was passed to Eden FX without additional drawings. Pierre Droulet then completed the design, refining it as he went. The Andorian Battlecruiser would appear in 8 episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, with one of those being In a Mirror Darkly Part 2. The design has also since appeared in the animated comedy series of Star Trek Lower Decks. When we think of warp speed goals in the Star Trek universe, we always think of the NX-01 Enterprise, the first Warp 5 starship of human design. But what about the speeds beforehand? Well, of course, we had the Phoenix breaking the warp barrier, then the NX Alpha breaking the warp 2 barrier, the NX Delta breaking the warp 3 barrier, but what about warp 4? The warp 4 barrier was all to do with the USS Franklin, the same ship we see in Star Trek Beyond. Today, we explore the Freedom class and the USS Franklin in Star Trek Explained. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host Captain Jack, and let's get into it. Before we warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. Did you know that you can now follow Trek Central on BlueSky and Threads? Like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, you can now also get your breaking Star Trek news on these new platforms as well. Join us today, the links are down below. While you're watching this video, I do have a question for you. I have always thought that instead of a Freedom class, Star Trek Beyond should have used an NX class of ship. Now that would have been cool, and also a great callback to Star Trek Enterprise for the movie. What do you think? While watching, comment your thoughts down below. Okay, let's go. At a presumed length of 137 meters, the Freedom class is a relatively small starship design. The overall design of a Freedom class hull features a saucer-shaped living and command section, something would later come to be symbolic of Starfleet's starship design. This section contains all the controls for the ship's functions, along with the living quarters and command and control locations. 2 impulse drive engines were positioned aft of the ship, facing aft, on either side of a large indent into the saucer section. From there, 2 warp nacelles were positioned on 2 pylons, stretching back a little outwards from the ship. These housed warp engines. The Freedom class was capable of reaching Warp 4 around the 2140s, with the USS Franklin being the first ship designed to do so. It's unclear if there was a test project to allow for Warp 4, in a similar way the NX project used the Alpha, Beta, Delta, and presumably Gamma to test the Warp 5 engine. While later Starfleet ships will be built on planet-side shipyards, as well as being designed to enter the atmosphere, the Freedom class did not do so. The class was to be built in space and not designed for atmospheric entry. However, with that said, the Freedom class can sustain both being crash-landed onto a planet and launching from a planet via reaching terminal velocity, in which case the stabilizers would be initiated for a liftoff. Weapons-wise, the ship had a light armament. It was armed with pulsed phase cannons and spatial torpedoes. In terms of defense systems, it featured polarized hull plating. Both defense and offensive systems would later be found on the successor NX class line of ships. A Freedom class typically includes a complement of shuttle pods. We can presume that these would either be the same class as the ones found on the NX-01 Enterprise or a predecessor model. The bridge of a Freedom class was located at the top center of the saucer section, in keeping with Starfleet design that would come to be. It contained all of the command and control functions. There was a central seat for the ship's commanding officer and chairs for the helmsman. Stations were also present for comms, science, engineering, and also others were spread around the room. The bridge also featured a view screen that was a transparent window, but did have the technology for technical information to be displayed on it. Aft the bridge was the transporter room. This was an open semicircular chamber facing the entrance door. Due to controversy over transporter use at the time the Freedom class was launched, it meant the technology was only intended to be used for cargo transport. However, modifying the USS Franklin's transporter systems to allow humans to be transported was not too difficult to do. The lower decks of a Freedom class design featured rooms such as a mess hall, along with main engineering, which is rather tiny and where the warp core is located. A cargo bay was also on board, next was a set of officers' quarters. It would seem the Freedom class had around 3 decks based on the technical information at hand. The Freedom class is presumed to have been superseded by the NX class of starships, which were humanity's first Warp 5 starship line launched in 2151 with the NX-01 Enterprise. As humanity's first Warp 4 starship, the NX Franklin, a Freedom class starship design was launched somewhere between 2145 and 2151. We don't know much about the early days of the Franklin. However, with the launch of the NX-01 Enterprise as humanity's first Warp 5 starship in 2151, we can presume the Franklin would have been relegated to defense of Earth and shipping lanes. With the end of the Earth-Romulan War in 2160 and the formation of the United Federation of Planets in 2161, the Franklin would receive a new dedication plaque and be placed under command of Captain Balthazar Edison. He was a former military assault command officer, a Mako, and a veteran of both the Xindi conflict and the Romulan War. The USS Franklin would go on many missions for the newly formed Federation for the next 4 years. However, the ship vanished in 2164 during a mission to the Gagarin radiation belt. It was an incident that would be taught to future Starfleet officers at Starfleet Academy. The disappearance of the Franklin caused much speculation in the Federation. Some theories ranged from surrendering to the Romulans or even being captured by a giant green hand. In reality, however, the USS Franklin had seemingly entered a wormhole and was displaced over space. It eventually crashed and landed on the planet of Ultimate. With no sign of rescue from the Federation, Captain Edison believed that the Federation had deliberately abandoned them on this harsh planet. In finally venturing out to their new world, Edison and his crew found relics left behind by the original native species of Ultimate. These relics included numerous starships, a drone workforce, and life-sustaining technology. This technology was capable of stealing the life force from its victims. Captain Edison and his crew would later abandon the wreck of the Franklin and turn their backs on the Federation. It was later revealed in Star Trek Beyond that the technology allowed the surviving crew, including Captain Edison, to capture passing alien ships and drain their crews of life to survive. This, in turn, mutated the biology of the original crew to resemble that of their victims. In time, Edison became known as a Warlord Krall. The changes were so distinct that much of his human identity was erased, along with the ability to speak English. By the year 2263, Jayler discovered the USS Franklin half buried under the surface of Ultimate in the alternative reality known as the Kelvin timeline. She then placed it under a holographic cloaking device and used the abandoned starship as a residence. Even after around 100 years, the Franklin still had active power reserves, serviceable engines, and intact data logs. Before her encounter with the late starship USS Enterprise crew, Jayler had begun repairs on the Franklin, learning English from its onboard computer and becoming familiar with the classical music of 20th century Earth stored in the ship's databanks.
I like the beats and shouting.
Well, you do.
After being stranded on Ultimate, following the destruction of the USS Enterprise via an attack from Krall and his swarm ships, Captain James C. Kirk, Commander Spock, Lieutenant Commander Montgomery Scott, and Ensign Pavel Chekhov would repair the Franklin and restore its transporter capabilities. Scotty also enhanced it to transport complex life forms rather than simple cargo, which it was initially designed for. The team would soon rescue the rest of the Enterprise crew from Krall, while also learning about Krall's plans to use his drone force and swarm ships, along with a super weapon as Yabonov, to attack the Federation's starbase Yorktown. Captain Kirk and the crew successfully piloted the Franklin out of Ultimate's atmosphere, via dropping the ship off a cliff in order to reach terminal velocity. Now under Captain Kirk's command, the Franklin caught up with Krall's forces at Yorktown. Kirk and crew piloted the Franklin into the swarm of ships and used outdated ship technology to disrupt the individual vessels' communications. This was done so by using old radio signals to create a chain reaction that destroyed most of the swarm ships.
Is that classical music?
Yes, Doctor, it would seem to be.
As Krall escaped into Yorktown Starbase, Kirk and the Franklin pursued Krall and the remaining 2 ships. The Enterprise crew piloted the Franklin into the internal decking structure and used the ship itself to destroy the attacking vessels, just before crash landing into the Yorktown Station's central plaza, near the headquarters building. In a desperate fight, Captain Kirk tracked down Krall and defeated him, stopping the use of a super weapon. Following the incident, Captain Kirk and Commodore Paris officially closed the missing in action report on the USS Franklin and its crew. In terms of known Freedom-class starships, we only know the USS Franklin, as seen in Star Trek Beyond. Given the NX-class launched in 2151, and Starfleet proceeded to then push forward with the NX-02, and then also ordered the NX-03 and 04, it is likely that the additional Freedom-class ships were no longer commissioned by Starfleet, instead favouring the more advanced NX-class of ships. The Franklin would have likely remained in service due to the losses Starfleet faced following the Earth-Romulan War between 2156 and 2160. As such, they would need warp-capable ships to continue exploration missions and defend the newly created United Federation of Planets in 2161. The Freedom-class USS Franklin makes its debut appearance in Star Trek Beyond, a Kelvin timeline film directed by Justin Lin. He felt that including a pre-Federation ship in the film satisfied a goal he had. This was for the movie to explore and also embrace everything in the Star Trek canon. Lin also believed that the Franklin seemed to serve as the film's plot and themes. Looking back at it, he noted the concept felt organic. The creative team of the Beyond film seemed to really love the idea. In the movie, the survivors of the Kelvin Enterprise are under the impression that they are the first humans on the planet of Ultimate. However, there is some antiquated Federation technology elsewhere on the planet which would prove otherwise. Deciding to include a vehicle such as the Franklin in the Beyond movie then presented a challenge. Screenwriter Doug Jung explained the team took a lot of care to ensure that there were specific details about what kind of ship this would be and what it could do so it would fit properly into the Star Trek timeline. Initially, the vessel was different to how it would look in the finished film. Supervising art director Don McCauley mentioned that originally the USS Franklin only had a small role in the movie when it started. It seemed the ship was originally planned to be called the Pioneer. The original script also saw the Franklin as a much smaller ship, buried in the sand of a desert, which would then be discovered by Scotty. Once Kirk and the rest of his team had rescued the other members of the Enterprise crew, the screenplay called for them to somehow get on board the craft. The script also made it clear the vessel was relatively old as a Starfleet ship that could withstand an extreme beating, but had also been lost on the planet for quite some time. As new versions of the Star Trek Beyond script were drafted, the ship's role grew more and more. Designer Sean Hargreaves created the USS Pioneer, which would later be called the Franklin, and also envisioned it as a large shuttlecraft. At the time concept art was produced, the design had changed to that of a freighter. Hargreaves would create some images showing a Pioneer under the sand. In another early concept of the vessel, it bore the name USS Pioneer and was shown launching from the planet's atmosphere using external rocket packs. In order for Captain Kirk and the crew to load supplies on board the Freedom-class ship, Sean Hargreaves designed a ring of large cargo doors, which were positioned on top of the starship. This sequence ultimately did not make it into the movie, as the other creative teams decided Kirk and crew would simply beam aboard the vessel. Hargreaves then changed the doors into prominent ridges. These were supposed to represent some kind of array. Landing struts were initially designed as it was intended for the craft to be capable of ascending and descending vertically. Due to the movie script evolving, the landing struts were never shown, which makes sense when you take into account of how the ship was discovered in the Star Trek Beyond finished film. By the time this script change had happened, the name of the vessel had also been switched to the USS Franklin. This is actually named after director Justin Lin's father, Frank Lin. For example, the Starship's dedication plaque has a slightly wider gap between the letters K and L to emphasize this tribute. Furthermore, the Franklin's registry number of 326 is a reference to Leonard Nimoy's birthday. Visual effects at double negative would tweak Sean Hargreaves' design. They were tasked with adjusting the Franklin on a shot-by-shot basis. After deciding which materials would be included in the vessel's construction, the VFX team added debris they had imagined had literally overgrown the ship hull during ages it spent on the ground in Ultimate. One addition was adding dirt and rocks due to the Franklin being sat on the planet for over 100 years. The VFX team had to add weaponry to the ship, as the script had changed once again. Ultimately, members of the film's shooting company highly approved of the Franklin. The ship worked its way up to becoming a super important part of the movie, and it turned out to be a fantastic looking set. In the years before the Federation, the Vulcans were one of the most powerful peoples in their neck of the Alpha Quadrant, possessing advanced technology and centuries of experience of interstellar travel. In the 22nd century, Vulcan starships were considerably more advanced than any Earth equivalent, and a fine example of this was the Suurok-class starship. This large vessel, which could serve as either a science vessel or combat cruiser, was one of the most common Vulcan starships, and an iconic symbol of the Vulcan High Command. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at this remarkable ship, one of the most recognisable Vulcan vessels. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. We're enjoying making these Star Trek videos, and we hope you're enjoying watching them. If you want to support their development, check out our Patreon via the link below. Any support is greatly appreciated. And a big thank you to those who've already supported us. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay? Engage. The Suurok-class starship was designed by and for the Vulcan High Command, which deployed them for long-range scientific missions and as a mid-sized cruiser in combat. The Suurok-class was developed and introduced sometime in the early 22nd century. By the latest, it was at least in service by 2136. The Suurok-class came in two different configurations, one designed as a scientific vessel and the other as a combat cruiser. There were some structural differences between the two variants, but we'll be discussing both of them in this video anyway. The Suurok-class was larger and more advanced than any other human vessel, even the Enterprise NX-01, possessing an advanced annular warp drive and tractor-beam technology that were far beyond humanity's understanding at the time. The ship was 350 meters in length, and its design was simple and elegant, with distinctly Vulcan aesthetics such as copper or red-colored hull plating and an annular warp drive. The main hull of the Suurok-class was needle-like, tapering to points at the forward and aft ends. This section was rounded on top but flatter on the bottom. Just after the ship's midpoint, a thick, arrowhead-shaped module protruded from a ship's ventral hull, connecting the Suurok-class's main hull to its warp ring. This warp ring encircled the ship's main hull section, and unlike the warp ring of the larger Dekeer-class cruiser, it was fixed in place. By the mid-22nd century, the Suurok-class starship was one of the fastest starship classes in the Vulcan fleet. During sublight travel, it was propelled by a pair of huge impulse engines, located on the upper aft face of the starship's ventral tower. Even at sublight speeds, the Suurok-class was faster and more maneuverable than most ships of its size, giving an edge in combat. Of course, the Suurok was also equipped with a warp drive, a key part of which was the ship's large, annular warp ring. This ring served the same function as human warp drives' warp nacelles, storing the ship's warp coils, but its design was more advanced and efficient. The warp drive of a Suurok-class starship was powerful, although its exact strength differed depending on the subclass. Science vessels of this class had a top speed of warp 6.5, while combat cruisers could reach warp 7. In either case, this was significantly faster than contemporary human vessels, which the fastest could only reach warp 5 at a push. The exact crew complement of a Suurok-class starship is unknown, as is most of its interior layout. The ship's crew quarters were located within the ship's ventral tower, which was lined with large windows on its forward end. Most of the ship's decks were located within the main hull of the ship, including the Suurok-class's bridge. The bridge was triangular, accessed by a turbolift at the back of the room. It contained multiple crew stations, a forward view screen, and the captain's chair. The interior configuration of the Suurok-class likely differed between the science and combat variants of the starship. Below the Suurok-class's impulse drives was a small shuttle bay, which featured an aft-facing set of hangar doors. This shuttle bay's exact complement is unknown. Unlike Earth vessels, the Suurok-class starship was equipped with deflector shields and a tractor beam, both of which were considerably classified technologies by Vulcan High Command. The ship's tractor beam projector was located on the underside of the main hull, just forward of the ventral tower, and it was capable of an impressive precision. The Suurok-class starship was also pretty well armed, although its armaments may well differ between the two variants of the ship. The combat variant, at least, boasted multiple particle beam emitters, which lined the inner surface of the ship's warp ring, as well as photonic torpedoes, allowing it to deal a considerable amount of damage in combat. The exact component of the Suurok-class is unknown, but these vessels were at least powerful enough to take on 3 Mazarite warships at once and win. The Suurok-class starship was the Vulcan High Command's most commonly used starship, the backbone of the Vulcan fleet. Ships of this class led the Vulcan's exploration and research initiatives, going on science missions deep into space, and they also served as the Vulcan's primary cruiser class. Capital ships of this class weren't as powerful as the fearsome Dekeer-class starship, but they tended to dish out more punishment than ever received. By the way, if you want to see a complete video on the Dekeer-class starship, check it out here on the Trek Central YouTube channel, a link's down below in the video description. In the early 2150s, the crew of the Enterprise NX-1 had a number of encounters with Suurok-class starships. One, the Navarre, was sent to pick up T'Pol for reassignment in 2151, while another, the Timur, was sent to relay personal messages to T'Pol that same year. The Timur later used its tractor beam to retrieve one of Enterprise's shuttle pods from a crevasse on a comet that it crashed into. In 2152, the Suurok-class cruiser Shran escorted Enterprise on a diplomatic mission, fending off a trio of Mazarite warships as they attempted to destroy the ship. Suurok-class cruisers were later deployed by the Vulcans to hunt down the Romulan drone ship during the Babel Crisis, and also saw use during the Earth-Romulan War. The Suurok cruisers fought on Earth's side. Earth and its allies were ultimately victorious in that war, and the victory led directly to the formation of the United Federation of Planets. After the formation of the Federation, use of the Suurok-class declined, as newer and more advanced Starfleet vessels took over territorial defense and scientific missions for Federation members. However, a few ships of the class remained in service well into the late 24th century, by which point they were mostly relegated to diplomatic missions and often escorted by newer Starfleet vessels. The Suurok-class starship was designed by senior illustrator Doug Drexler for Star Trek Enterprise. Drexler based on some of the original design sketches Matt Jeffries had done for the original series of the USS Enterprise. Believing that simplicity and clear shapes of Jeffries' designs were what made the original series ship so iconic and memorable. Drexler wanted the Vulcan ship to be similar and recognisable at any scale, and he took significant inspirations from Jeffries' early work to get it that way. Drexler considered a few directions for the Suurok-class before settling on a version that ultimately made it to the screen. One design resembled the Toplana half from First Contact, with 3 bulky rotating drive modules suspended on arms from a central, needle-like body. Another featured 3 blocky warp nacelles ringing a central hull, which featured a spherical, Jeffries-inspired crew module at the front. The finished design was based on another Jeffries concept, which depicted the Enterprise as a needle-like ship within a set of enormous rings. All three concept designs were smooth-hulled and bright red in colour, matching the Toplana half, and featured distinctive curves and peaks, like the Vulcan Temple from Star Trek III, establishing a consistent Vulcan design language. The first draft of what would become the finished design of the Suurok-class was very similar to the finished model, except it was upside down. The ventral tower on the finished Suurok-class was instead a dorsal tower. Drexler experimented with adding Toplana half-style engine pods around the ship's warp ring, but decided to remove them shortly after he decided to have the ship's tower on the bottom instead of the top. This was done to make it so that from certain angles, the warp ring looked like it wasn't connected to the main hull at all. The goal of this was to make the Vulcan ship seem as if it defied the laws of physics, as it fit a species that, at the time of Enterprise, had technology that was far beyond human understanding. Drexler's design was built out into a CGI model, and made its screen debut in Episode 8 of Enterprise's first season, Breaking the Ice. The original model of a Suurok-class starship was low to medium quality, as the script for Breaking the Ice didn't require any close-up shots. This made the model hard to use in future episodes, however, so a higher quality CGI version of the ship was built for future appearances. This new model was built by Eden FX's Pierre Drouillet and made some changes to Drexler's original design. The hull colour was changed from red to copper, the dimensions of the ship were tweaked, and some detailing of the ventral tower was altered and additional details were added across the ship, including the impulse engines and the shuttle bay. The new design was likely intended to just be a retcon of the original, not a different ship. However, some sources have established that the original model represents the science configuration of the Suurok-class, while Drouillet's redesign represents the ship in a combat configuration. What do you think of this? When it comes to the United Federation of Planets founding species, the Tellarites are by far the most overlooked, but they still played a pivotal role in the history of the Alpha Quadrant. Like the Vulcans and the Andorians, they were a small empire in their own right before joining the Federation. And like their neighbours, they had their own unique assortment of military starships. The most prominent of these was the Tellarite cruiser, identified in the Star Trek Expanded media as the Malcom-class cruiser, which we'll be taking a look at today. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. We're enjoying making these Star Trek videos, and we hope you are too. If you want to support their development, check out our Patreon via the link below. Any support is greatly appreciated. As always, please do let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Oh, and while you're there, tell me, which is your favourite Enterprise-era alien starship? Not humanities, I mean the likes of the Vulcans, the Klingons, the Xindi, and of course the Tellarites. Comment below. Okay, engage! According to the expanded media of Star Trek, the Tellarite cruise was not actually an original Tellarite design. Rather, it had originally been designed by the Arconians for use in their own fleet before being appropriated by the United Planets of Tellar. By the way, that's Arconians, not Iconians. Just to, know the difference. It is unknown when the class was designed or when the Tellarites actually adopted it, but they were in service for at least a few decades prior to the 2150s, making up the core of the Tellarite fleet. At 200 meters in length, the Malcom-class cruiser was smaller than a contemporary human NX-class starship, and even had a narrower and more compact profile as well. The cruiser had a similar shape to the later Cardassian Gallo-class cruiser, with a bulbous, shovel-shaped head and a thin beam-shaped aft section ending in a cluster of engines. The Malcom-class cruiser had a total of 6 large impulse engines clustered at its aft end, 2 primary engines and 4 secondary engines, which made the cruiser fast and maneuverable in combat. The cruiser was also warp-capable, propelled by a pair of stubby nacelles mounted to the sides of a forward section. These nacelles featured large, distinctive buzzard collectors on the front ends, which were larger than the warp systems themselves. Despite this, the Tellarite cruiser had a maximum warp speed of warp 5, the same as the Enterprise NX-01, despite the NX-1's much larger nacelles. The Tellarite cruiser boasts fairly robust deflector shields, and it features a shuttle bay with a capacity for a few craft. Modified, a 25th century of the Malcom-class seen in Star Trek Online was also equipped with IFF manipulators for defensive purposes. Oh, and they could also carry Federation shuttlecraft, Arconian patrol ships, or Tellarite Adamant-class fighters. Tellarite cruisers were also equipped with standard one-man escape pods. The Tellarite cruiser had a crew complement of 30 personnel, and its interior was configured to suit the Tellarite's tastes. Its life support systems kept the interior warm, and the crew areas featured mud baths for the crew to relax in, a standard feature on any Tellarite starship. The Malcom-class's main bridge was located on the uppermost deck at the centre of its forward section, and it featured a long, crescent-shaped row of viewports for the benefit of the bridge crew. The ventral portion of the cruiser's forward section prominently featured 3 antenna clusters, including the cruiser's central subspace relays. Standard configuration Malcom-class cruisers were armed with particle cannons, with the primary cannons located either side of the cruiser's nose. The vessels were reasonably well armed, and they were tough enough that the Tellarites were able to win wars against the Andorians with them. However, 2 Andorian cruisers still outclassed a single Tellarite cruiser, so they weren't overwhelmingly that powerful. According to the expanded media, in later centuries, the weaponry of the remaining Tellarite cruisers was updated to fit the times. By the 2270s, an upgraded Malcom-class vessel was considered heavy cruisers, and they were matched for Constitution-class starships, armed with phaser bangs and photon torpedoes. Updated versions of the cruiser, seen in the early 25th century, had variable weaponry, with 5 hardpoints compatible with phasers or torpedo launchers. During the mid-22nd century, the Tellarites weren't the only ones using Malcom-class cruisers. The Arconians, who originally designed the cruiser, used it in their own fleets as well. And the Xindi Arboreals also somehow got their hands on the design at one point. However, the cruiser was most commonly seen in the hands of the Tellarites, who used them as their primary capital ship class. The Malcom-class cruiser was the largest and most powerful Tellarite military vessel, in fact, despite being relatively small, even by 22nd century standards. But the cruiser's small size reinforced its utility. The Malcom was tough, reliable, and effective in a variety of circumstances. The Tellarites used them extensively in their border wars with the Andorians, one of which was commanded by future Tellarite ambassador Graal. During the Babel Crisis, the Tellarites deployed 3 vessels as part of a joint fleet hunting the Romulans' drone ship. One Malcom-class cruiser was destroyed by the drone ship during its mission, though the Andorians rescued its crew. Tellarite cruisers also participated in the Earth-Romulan War on the side of Earth. After the formation of the Federation Starfleet essentially took over defense duties for its member worlds, but a few Tellarite cruisers remained in operation. Some continued to serve as warships, while others were retrofitted for other roles. One Malcom-class vessel was converted into a sleeper ship, for example. These ships continued to appear sporadically throughout the following centuries, and according to Star Trek Online, the MMO video game, they even saw a renaissance at the start of the 25th century, now used by Starfleet itself. The Tellarite cruiser only showed up briefly in Star Trek Enterprise, and the CGI model used to depict it was actually reused from an older episode, having originally been designed as an Arconian destroyer for the episode Dawn. As this was meant to be a one-off ship, concept artist John Eaves wasn't given any specifics for the design, and he ended up deciding to base the look of the ship on the rearward bonnet head sharks. This was the inspiration for the cruiser's shovel-shaped forward end, thinner aft section, and vertically orientated engine block, although Eaves was careful not to make the ship too shark-like. John Eaves also incorporated a personal touch in the design, a gap in the hull of the aft section. Those sorts of gaps would have been impractical to work into physical models, but when VFX for Star Trek switched over to using CGI for the ships, it became more feasible, so the franchise's ship designers had made a point of integrating gaps into new vessels. John Eaves also designed 2 radically different concept designs for the Arconian destroyer, a wedge-shaped vessel similar to the A-Wing starfighter from Star Wars, and another modelled on a pelican's beak. The former shared the founder design's vertical engine block, which Eaves incorporated to give the ship a noticeably different silhouette from the Enterprise. The Arconian destroyer was built into a CGI model by Pierre Droulet, and the finished version closely resembled Eaves' original production sketch. The Arconian cruiser was later repurposed for the episodes The Council and Countdown, which used the model to depict the Xindi Arboreals attack cruisers. From there, the model was repurposed again, finally becoming a Tellarite cruiser for the episodes Babel 1, United, and Inner Mirror Darkly Part 2. When the model was adopted for use as the Tellarite cruiser, it was tweaked a little to make the ship distinct from its Arconian and Xindi predecessors. The Tellarite version of the cruiser was painted olive green, and its impulse engines glowed green, in contrast to the original brown hull paint and blue impulse engines. A large cannon that had originally been mounted to the cruiser's underside was removed, while 2 other large cannons mounted to the sides of the main hull were also removed, replaced with stubby warp nacelles with distinctive green buzzard collectors. The animated series of Star Trek Prodigy later reused the design of a Tellarite cruiser to represent a Tellarite sleeper ship. This vessel appeared in 2 episodes, Preludes and Supernova Part 1. When we think about important Vulcan characters in the Star Trek universe, we typically think of Mr. Spock, then maybe Ambassador Sarek. However, the Vulcan known as T'Pol was perhaps one of the most important, due to her serving on board the first human Warp 5 exploration starship, Enterprise, under the command of Captain Jonathan Archer. While we know the stories of T'Pol's time on board Enterprise, we don't know much about her future after the series ended. In today's video, we look at the fate of Captain T'Pol, and yes, that is a clue. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. Like always, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. Okay, so we're enjoying making these Star Trek videos on various topics, but we really need your support to keep making them. Consider supporting Trek Central via Patreon using the link in the video description. This really helps us make new Star Trek videos while we're also combating Paramount's copyright and YouTube's copyright systems. You'll get exclusive access to videos and events as well as more Galaxy-class rewards. If you have any questions about it, comment them down below and I'll personally answer them. As always, please do let us know your thoughts in the comment section below on this video topic, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay, engage! In the Star Trek canon, we don't know much about the fate of T'Pol. The last we see of her is at the founding of the United Federation of Planets in 2161, but we do know more about her story. The following Star Trek information comes from what we call extended canon, which means items like books, comics, and more. Don't worry, we'll link the books we mentioned in a video description below, so you can read these fantastic stories for yourself. Following Enterprise's return from its mission to the Delphic Expanse, T'Pol officially accepted a Starfleet commission at the rank of Commander. With the outbreak of the Earth-Romulan War in 2155, Captain Archer sent T'Pol to Vulcan to convince T'Pau to bring Vulcan fully into the Romulan War. Unfortunately, T'Pol was unsuccessful in convincing the Vulcans to join the fight against the Romulans. However, she did start an investigation into secretive arms shipments. T'Pol would return and serve on Enterprise for the rest of the war. T'Pol's mission can be read in the Romulan War novel Beneath the Raptor's Wing. Now, following the formation of the United Federation of Planets in 2161, T'Pol would be promoted to the rank of Captain. She would assume command of a Columbia-class known as the USS Endeavour. This starship was previously the NX-06 and would fight in the Romulan War, where it took heavy damage due to the Romulans' nuclear weapons. Following the end of the war, it was refit into the Columbia-class specification, otherwise known as the NX refit type. T'Pol would command the Endeavour and would frequently work closely with now Admiral Jonathan Archer. Given the status of the Endeavour and Enterprise being retired, Archer would choose T'Pol's command as his personal flagship. This saw the pair work together frequently on missions for the new Federation. In September 2162, Archer and T'Pol would travel on the Endeavour to the Chemisar colony. This was a Tandaran colony where the world had recently been raided by members of a Radal alignment, who actually posed as Suliban. While it did involve a brief fight, the Starfleet crew dealt with the attackers and rescued those who had been kidnapped. Following the conclusion of the mission, Endeavour's first officer, Commander Malcom Reed, was promoted to captain and departed the ship to assume command of the USS Pioneer. As such, Commander Chief Ravache would take his place. In January 2163, T'Pol and Endeavour would respond to a distress call from an Anaxanari starship that had been attacked. Upon meeting the vessel, Endeavour would discover the silent attackers. This was the same mysterious species that Enterprise dealt with many years ago. T'Pol found herself in a similar situation. Thankfully, drawing on her past experience, Endeavour engaged the vessel and pushed it back. The encounter would be reported to Starfleet Command. Several more incidents would be reported to Starfleet over the following months. Typically, these were occurring in the same region of space. Many unaligned worlds would contact the Federation seeking help on the matter. To respond to the crisis, Starfleet dispatched a task force to the sector in which the USS Endeavour was assigned to. Following numerous engagements and the destruction of the USS Fijal, a war seemed all but inevitable. However, the crew of the Endeavour determined that Fijal's destruction was the work of Jula Garros and his Orion Syndicate allies. It seemed they were intent on pushing the Federation into a new war. Thankfully, the crisis was resolved peacefully. These events take place in the Enterprise novel, Rise of the Federation, A Choice of Futures. Unfortunately, the silent enemy would not stay silent for long. This is a series of events known as the Vertian Crisis. In April of 2163, Starfleet and the Federation were still operating their task force in searching for the silent enemy. They were known as the Vertians, but later in Star Trek history, they would be known as the Alachi. Endeavour and T'Pol managed to disable a Vertian starship with several other task force vessels. Along with the other ship's away teams, Endeavour's crew boarded the vessel but could not secure it. Instead, they took prisoners and withdrew. Days later, the Vertians responded. a sizable task force intercepted and disabled the Allied fleet. The alien force would demand the surrender of all crews. In reality, the species actually wanted the return of their own crew, not the surrender of the Federation and the Allied forces. Admiral Shran, who was commanding the task force, ordered the prisoners to be released. Lieutenant Commander Hoshi Sato volunteered to accompany the Vertians back to their ships because she and Captain T'Pol had spent the prior days trying to communicate with their prisoners. T'Pol convinced Admiral Shran, who approved their plans, and eventually mind-melded with them, convincing them to stop their attacks. The task was completed and a ceasefire with the species was forged. November 2163 would see Captain T'Pol and the Endeavour dispatched to the Iota-Pegasi system. This was to resolve a conflict between Tellar and the colonists of the ECS Vortrekker. They had colonised an asteroid in the Tellarite-claimed star system. Thankfully, an armed conflict was avoided. This was thanks to Lieutenant Commander Hoshi Sato's suggestion of relocating the asteroid to the nearby Ross 271 star system. Both parties agreed, and once the relocation was complete, Endeavour and her crew departed. In March 2164, Endeavour would transport Admiral Archer and Commissioner Saval to Rigel for talks with the Rigelian Trade Commission. This was concerning the admission of a united Rigel world and colonies into the United Federation of Planets. T'Pol and Endeavour would play a role in ensuring this process went smoothly. Her ship and crew would later escort Archer to Babel Station in June to negotiate the specifics of the agreement. While discussions were taking place, T'Pol received news about the abduction of 2 Starfleet officers from Malcom Reed's ship, the USS Pioneer, as well as the theft of secret files from Rigel's archives. Admiral Archer ordered T'Pol to assist Pioneer with its search efforts. These adventures take place in the Enterprise, Rise of the Federation novel, Tower of Babel. In 2165, it was alleged that the Vulcan Kishar was a fraud, and that Suurok's teachings actually endorsed the Vulcan High Command's militarism. As such, T'Pol and Endeavour would travel to Vulcan to assist in uncovering the truth. The starship almost fell victim to sabotage intended to destroy the Vulcan Space Central Station and spark an uprising. Thankfully, Endeavour survived due to the efforts of Chief Engineer Michael Romaine and Dr. Tobin Dax. T'Pol's crew played a vital role in exposing the attempted coup that former Vulcan administrator Velas was staging. While successful in stopping the attempted coup, it did cost T'Pol several of her own crew members. In 2186, at the age of 98, T'Pol had left Starfleet service and became an ambassador to the Federation. T'Pol would be living peacefully on Vulcan, at a family home, with Tucker and their 2 children, Tamir and Lorian. Yes, Charles Tucker III, aka Trip, is actually alive. Surprise! We've done other videos here on the Trek Central channel about Tucker's return, so you need to go and watch them to learn all about his fate in the Star Trek universe. We've seen T'Pol active in alternate universes, notably in Star Trek Lower Decks. In the episode Fisher Quest, we see T'Pol has joined the crew of the Anaximander, which is captained by William Boimler. She was a first officer and said to be an expert on human emotions after being married to Trip Tucker for 63 years. She was friends with the Trill Curzon Dax, who suffered a major injury. With no other Trill on board to save the Dax symbiont, T'Pol took on his Cutcher in order to protect and pass on the memories of the Trill symbiont. When Beckett Mariner described Brad Boimler from her universe as a big Starfleet nerd, but she compared to Jonathan Archer, T'Pol agreed that this was an accurate description. During its historic mission in the early 2150s, the Earth starship Enterprise NX-01 encountered many prominent alien species, some of which were friendly to humanity and some of which were not. The latter group included the Klingons, the rulers of a powerful empire in the Alpha and Beta quadrants, who Enterprise often got in trouble with. When it did, it often came face to face with the warships of the Klingon Empire. One of these was often the Birds of Prey, but also included other attack vessels, including the mighty D5 Battlecruiser. This fearsome ship was one of the main capital ships of the Klingon Empire in the mid-22nd century, and in this video, we'll be telling its story. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. Before we do warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. Now we're enjoying making these Star Trek videos on various topics, and we hope you're enjoying watching them. If you want to support their development, please join our Patreon via the link below. You'll get exclusive access to our videos and events, as well as more Galaxy-class rewards. As always, please do let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. But also, comment what you would name this Klingon D5 battlecruiser if you were to command one. It better be fearsome and honor-bound, I guess, because that's all the Klingons are about. Okay, engage. Introduced in the 2120s, the D5 class battlecruiser was built as a mainline capital ship for the Klingon fleet. It served in this role for decades, and by the 2150s, it was the Klingons' primary battlecruiser class. While they were likely not built for such purposes, D5s were also very adaptable ships, and some ships of the class were converted into freighters or fuel tankers. Like most other Klingon starships, the D5 had a bird-like shape, claw-like warp nacelles mounted to downswept wings at the aft end, and a bullet-shaped command section connected to the main hull by a thin neck. The actual size of the D5 is disputed. Some expanded media sources give it a length of 155 meters, while others give it a length of 210.62 meters, a wingspan of 157.57 meters, a height of 44.12 meters, and a mass of 273,000 metric tons. Like with a contemporary Klingon bird of prey, the D5 cruiser's reactor complex and warp engine sections were located towards the top of the dorsal hull, and the ship featured a distinctive set of heat exchangers for the reactor at the forward end of the aft hull, which glowed bright red. Unlike the bird of prey, however, the D5's warp system included conventional warp nacelles rather than warp wings. These nacelles were mounted at the end of the wings, and they had a clawed shape, similar to the 22nd century Romulan warp nacelles. The D5's warp drive could reach up to warp 6, making the cruiser faster than the fastest human vessels of the time. The D5 also featured a set of 3 aft impulse engines, which were fairly powerful for a ship of a D5 size, giving the cruiser impressive sublight speeds and exceptional maneuverability, in keeping with the typically fast-paced nature of Klingon battle tactics. Combat model D5s were very tough ships. Their hulls consisted of diffusion-bonded monocrystal, and they were plated with dispersive armour, which allowed them to shrug off a great deal of enemy fire even when their own shields were offline. The D5 cruiser had powerful shields on top of that, making it quite formidable in battle. While the D5, like other Klingon ships of the era, didn't have a cloaking device, it did have a highly sophisticated sensor system. Like with most Klingon ships, the interior decks of the D5 cruiser were concentrated in the aft section, which featured the ship's cargo bays, crew quarters, main engineering, and other key stations. The bridge, command suites, and quarters of the ship's captain were instead located in the ship's forward section, which was connected to the aft section by a broad corridor that ran through the ship's neck. The forward section also featured a pair of docking collars to either side, used to offload supplies from Klingon freighters. Some sources differ on the ship's standard crew complement. Some give numbers as low as 48, while others give numbers as high as 350. Like most Klingon ships, the interior decks of the D5 were grimy, unfinished, and largely lacking for comfort. Pipes and mechanical elements were exposed along the walls, giving the vessel an industrial feel, and an oily fog filled the air in many sections. The walls tended to be grimy, and the ship as a whole was usually dimly lit, in keeping with Klingon preferences. These aesthetics were shared by many other Klingon starships even into the 24th century. The D5 class battlecruiser was armed with at least 6 heavy disruptors and 2 torpedo launchers, a respectable arsenal for a warship of its time. 2 heavy disruptors were mounted on the tips of the nacelles, while 2 others were located on the forward section, 1 dorsal and 1 ventral. The 2 most powerful disruptors were mounted in a large turret with a 360-degree firing arc on the cruiser's belly. The ship's main torpedo launcher was mounted in the bow, on the underside of the ship's head, while the others were mounted aft just above the impulse engines. These launchers usually fired photon torpedoes. While the D5 class battlecruiser was designed as a capital ship, some ships of the class were converted into freighters and tankers, and these ships were considerably less formidable than the warship variants. D5 cruisers only required a crew of 12, and they had weaker shields, weaker armour, and less weaponry. Most notably, the belly turret was removed in favour of a mount for up to a dozen cargo pods, which could be used to haul a variety of valuable resources, such as dilithium. The D5 class battlecruiser served the Klingon Imperial fleet as its main capital ship, fighting alongside squadrons of smaller warships in the Klingon Empire's 22nd century wars. It was the largest ship in the Klingon fleet at the time, and is popularly used as a flagship by high-ranking Klingon officers, including Admiral Krell. D5 cruisers made up the cores of most 22nd century Klingon fleets, supported by birds of prey, and they also usually fared well on their own due to their speed and firepower. As previously mentioned, some D5 cruisers served the Klingon Empire in less glamorous ways, mainly as freighters and tankers. Such ships were still combat capable, but they were far outclassed by dedicated combat starships. Still, this variant was tough enough that one such ship, commanded by a Klingon named Korak, was able to use it to harass outlying colonies into surrendering valuable resources. During the early 2150s, several D5 cruisers had encounters with the Earth starship Enterprise. One of these, the IKS Bortas, was sent after refugees from Klingon space that had been rescued by Enterprise in 2152, sparking a small skirmish. Bortas thoroughly outgunned Enterprise, but Enterprise was able to disable it by lowering Bortas into a gas giant's rings and igniting a plasma pocket. Later, in 2154, Enterprise survived 2 more standoffs with D5 cruisers, but it wasn't able to outright defeat either of them. Enterprise disabled the first cruiser, commanded by Captain Marg, by using its grapplers to tear off one of the cruiser's warp nacelles, allowing Enterprise to escape the encounter. In the second encounter, the Enterprise and its sister ship, Columbia, engaged in a brief battle with Admiral Krell's D5 cruiser and its escort fleet. The 2 ships held their own just long enough to buy Dr. Flock's time to resolve the situation peacefully, otherwise they might not have survived the encounter. What would become the D5 class battlecruiser was originally designed as a fuel tanker for Marauders, a second season episode of Star Trek Enterprise. Production designer, John Eves, came up with the design, and from the outset he intended for the ship to be combat ready, believing that all Klingon starships would be armed and ready to fight. As a result, he ultimately created a warship with fuel tanks strapped to the bottom, an aggressive yet functional design that fit the Klingon ethos. Eves described the design as being halfway between the Klingon bird of prey and another Klingon vessel he had designed for Enterprise, the Klingon Raptor. The ship borrowed a lot of design elements from Eves' other 22nd century Klingon ships, including exposed cabling along the wings, a large frontal heat exchanger on the aft section, and an overall industrial experimental look. As the ship was originally meant to be a freighter, it was designed with a long neck to increase the length of the ventral cargo rack below it. Eves' design was built into a CGI model by artists at Eden FX, and it made its debut in Marauders. Ultimately, this Klingon cargo ship would never be seen again, but the design would later be reused as the D5 class Klingon battlecruiser, with the cargo rack removed and replaced with a ventral turret. This variant came to be during the production of the second season episode, Judgment, the script of which originally called for a D7 class Klingon battlecruiser, a class of Klingon vessel from the original series. But producer Rick Berman believed the Klingon battlecruiser in the episode should be an older model, and reference to it in the script were changed to be the D5 class, and a new ship design was needed. John Eves had previously designed the D4 class Klingon battlecruiser, essentially an earlier model of a D7, but this design had been rejected, and instead his Klingon freighter was converted into a warship. After making its debut in Judgment, the battlecruiser variant of the D5 went on to appear in 2 season 4 episodes, The Augment and Divergent. After making first contact with the Vulcans and developing a more enlightened global society, the human race largely put war behind it, becoming a peaceful, collaborative species that focused on discovery and cooperation rather than conflict. But Earth still became embroiled in interstellar wars now and again, and few such wars were more pivotal than the 22nd century's Earth-Romulan War. This brutal, 4-year-long conflict caused a dramatic shift in the interstellar politics of the Alpha Quadrant, and it paved the way for the formation of the United Federation of Planets. In this video, we'll take a close look at this mysterious conflict, examining what we know of its background, chronology, and legacy. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack. If you want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. We're enjoying making these Star Trek videos, and we hope you are too. If you want to support their development, check out our Patreon via the link below. Any support is greatly appreciated. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay, engage. At the start of the 22nd century, the core of what would later be known as the Alpha Quadrant was home to a number of minor interstellar powers. The most prominent of these were the Confederacy of Vulcan, the Andorian Empire, and the United Planets of Tellar. The United Earth would also become important in the early 2150s. None of these states were particularly powerful, and to the leaders of the Romulan Star Empire, that made this region of the galaxy seem ripe for conquest. Ruled with an iron fist by the Romulans, which was an ancient offshoot of the Vulcans, the Romulan Empire was the closest of the galaxy's great powers to Earth and its neighbours. From the imperial capital of Romulus and its twin planet, the industrial world of Remus, the Romulan Senate and its fearsome Starfleet ruled over a vast tract of the Beta Quadrant. At this point in their history, they were always looking to expand even further. This was out of fear as much as imperialist greed. Treachery and paranoia were deeply ingrained in Romulan society, and as a consequence, Romulan leaders were always looking on the outside galaxy with suspicion. If anything stood a chance of becoming a threat, the Romulans would seek to crush it before it got the opportunity. As a consequence, the Romulan Star Empire spent centuries pursuing a policy of covert expansionism, constantly strengthening itself with preemptively subjugating potential threats. By the mid-22nd century, Vulcan and its neighbours had been chosen as the Romulans' next targets, and the Romulans had begun the early stages of their planned conquest. Unlike the neighbouring Klingon Empire, the Romulan Empire tended to conquer its targets slowly, carrying out lengthy campaigns of sabotage and subversion to soften up its enemies before moving in for the kill. To that end, the Romulans set about infiltrating and destabilising the major Alpha Quadrant governments, sowing disunity and chaos wherever they could. They began by infiltrating Vulcan High Command, which governed the Confederacy of Vulcan space forces and relations with other species. Romulan spies posing as Vulcans covertly accumulated positions within the Vulcan military, and they began making deals with powerful Vulcans that were sympathetic to the Romulans. The most notable of these infiltrators was Major Talok, who worked directly with the administrator of the Vulcan High Command, Valas, who was a Romulan sympathizer. Through Valas, the Romulans effectively took control of the Vulcan High Command, which fostered suspicion towards Vulcan's neighbours and promoted isolationism. In the early 2150s, the Vulcan High Command slowly consolidated power. Before long, Romulan puppets had achieved near-complete control over Vulcan society. The last holdout was the peaceful Cyrenite sect, pacifist devotees of the original philosophy of Suurok, which they believed the Vulcan High Command had distorted. To discredit the Cyrenites in the eyes of the Vulcan public, a minister of Valas orchestrated a bombing of the United Earth Embassy on Vulcan, and framed the Cyrenites for it. With Romulan control over Vulcan all but assured, Valas moved on to the next stage of the invasion plan, preparing to start a war with the Andorians, who had been the rivals of the Vulcans for centuries. To that end, he created falsified evidence that the Andorians were building weapons of mass destruction to use against Vulcan. He pushed Vulcan High Command to approve a preemptive invasion of Andoria in response. But before this invasion could get underway, the crew of the Earth Starfleet vessel Enterprise threw a wrench in the Romulans' plans. Captain Jonathan Archer and Commander T'Pol of Enterprise had been sent to Vulcan to investigate the Cyrenites' role in the embassy bombing, and they not only discovered that the Cyrenites had been framed, but they also recovered ancient writings of Suurok that proved the Cyrenites' interpretation of his philosophy was correct. The last involvement in the bombing, as well as his role in attempting to start a war with Andoria under false pretenses, came to light shortly thereafter. Vulcan High Command was promptly overthrown in a coup and dissolved, and the Romulan agents embedded in the Vulcan government were all purged, although their ties to Romulus were not exposed. The shift in power on Vulcan led to a softening of the tensions between the Vulcans, Andorians, and Tellarites, which the Romulans had been counting on to seize control over the region. While the three species had all harboured a long-standing animosity towards each other, the United Earth, the new interstellar power in the region, had forged alliances with all of them, and was beginning to play a vital role in resolving local disputes. Hoping to get their plans back on track, the Romulans deployed advanced drone ships capable of disguising themselves as other vessels, which they would then use to carry attacks on civilian shipping. By attacking Andorian ships using drones disguised as Tellarite cruisers, and vice versa for Tellarite ships, the Romulans hoped to incite a war between the Andorians and the Tellarites. But once again, Enterprise got in the way. Captain Jonathan Archer discovered the true nature of the drone ships, and this time he was able to recover evidence of the Romulans' involvement in the plot. In the end, the Romulans' drone ship campaign, known in the history as the Babel Crisis, had the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of sowing division among the Alpha Quadrant powers, it united them against Romulan interference in the region. The next year, in 2155, the Vulcans, Andorians, Tellarites, and humanity banded together to form a coalition of planets, an interstellar confederation geared towards mutual defense and promoting interspecies cooperation. Together, they stood a much better chance of resisting Romulan interference in the region. The Romulans watched these developments with unease. They feared the coalition of planets could pose a serious threat, and above all, they were worried about the apparent threat posed by humanity. This previous obscure species had come out of nowhere to unite the Romulans' targets against them, plowing through centuries-old tensions to bring unprecedented unity to the Alpha Quadrant in just a few years. Romulan leaders believed that humanity was dangerous.
It's a setback. We have to deal with the humans. They are the ones that brought the Andorians and Tellarites together. The second drone ship is armed and ready for battle. With 2 ships, I can deliver a devastating blow.
A According to the Enterprise novels, the Romulans spent the rest of 2155 attempting to destabilize a coalition of planets, with their schemes getting more destructive and more desperate as the year wore on. They successfully got the Coordinates to withdraw from the coalition after wiping out 500 million of them in an attack on Cordan Prime, and they also began using computer viruses to seize control of foreign ships, which they would use to attack coalition civilian craft. Using stolen Klingon vessels, the Romulans attempted to incite a war between the Coalition and the Klingon Empire, destroying the commercial ship SS Kobayashi Maru in one particularly notorious attack. The Romulans also commandeered several Vulcan ships, using them to attack human vessels near Alpha Centauri, hoping to sow distrust within the Coalition. Despite the Romulans' efforts, however, the members of the Coalition of Planets only strengthened ties in light of these attacks. Ultimately, the Romulans would have to resort to open warfare. Unfortunately, Star Trek canon establishes very little about the Earth-Romulan War itself, and expanded media sources are full of conflicting information about the conflict. However, the Enterprise novels, particularly the Romulan War arc, were based on plans for how future seasons of Star Trek Enterprise would have covered the war if it had lasted longer. So we're going to focus on their version of the timeline, as well as a time frame from Federation, the first 150 years, though we'll discuss events from other expanded media sources as well. In late 2155, the Romulans began a series of covert attacks on several planets. Among them, Deneva, Tarad 4, Anaxar 2, Tholiva 4, and Berengaria 6. The following year, they attacked the Earth starship Columbia, which was written off as missing, and Starbase 1 in the Eldron system. Earth initially tried to negotiate an end to these attacks. Either way, if you want to check out the story of the missing NX-02 Columbia, we've done a dedicated video here on this Trek Central channel. Still, after the Romulans refused to respond to humanity's offer of diplomacy, the United Earth was ultimately forced to declare war on the Romulan Star Empire. The Earth-Romulan War lasted for 4 years, from 2156 to 2160, and it was notoriously brutal. The war was almost exclusively fought by the two powers' space forces, without any known ground battles. Nuclear weapons were used in some battles, and neither side took prisoners, as the way ships were designed at the time made it kind of impractical or impossible. As a consequence, humans and Romulans never actually came face to face at any point in the conflict, and even after the war's end, humanity still had no idea what the Romulans looked like. Initially, the Andorians and Tellarites fought alongside Earth against the Romulans, but the Vulcans decided to stay out of the conflict, to the outrage of many humans. In the hope of recruiting more allies, Starfleet dispatched Archer and the Enterprise to Kronos to try and convince the Klingons to help, but the Klingons refused to get involved. Over the war's first year, both sides had their fair share of victories and defeats, but the tide of the war soon began to turn in the Romulans' favour, especially after, following a narrowly thwarted Romulan attack on Andoria, the Andorians and Tellarites decided to withdraw from the war. With the coalition of planets effectively dead, Earth was left to fight alone, and the United Earth Starfleet was forced onto the defensive. By this point, destroying Earth was the Romulans' main focus. They saw the humans as the main obstacle to their imperial ambitions in the region, and they believed that if humanity was no longer a factor, the Romulan Empire could divide and conquer their neighbours much more easily. To that end, the Romulans began planning for an all-out attack on Earth, which they hoped would bring an end to the human nuisance once and for all. In preparation, the Romulans launched a surprise invasion of the nearby neutral planet, Denobula, in 2158, where they gathered their fleet for an attack on Earth. Once the fleet was ready, it launched a surprise attack on Mars, aimed at destroying Earth's outer defences, the Verteron Array, an arsenal of orbital defence weapons meant to redirect comets. Oh, and Utopia Planitia fleet yards, where 6 of Starfleet's warp 5 vessels were under construction. Both the Verteron Array and the fleet yards were destroyed, and the Romulan fleet proceeded to attack Earth. The Romulans came very close to taking Earth, but in the end they were defeated, thanks to fire from the second Verteron Array on Venus and the efforts of the United Earth Starfleet. Humanity suffered significant losses, but in the end they destroyed a majority of the attacking Romulan fleet and forced the rest to withdraw. Earth's victory ultimately inspired the rest of the coalition of planets to get back in the fight, and the tide of the war turned yet again, allowing coalition forces to advance to the edge of Romulan space. In 2160, the Romulans gathered their forces for an all-out second assault on Earth, mustering a fleet of 81 ships at the orbital shipyards above the planet of Shran. Starfleet dispatched a fleet of 25 ships, commanded by Jonathan Archer, to destroy the shipyards and the fleet stationed there, hoping to prevent a second attack on Earth. Archer was able to catch the Romulan fleet by surprise and destroy several of the ships in its first wave of the attack. But the Romulans had the advantage of numbers, and Archer's forces suffered heavy casualties as well. Captain Archer received reinforcements in the form of Klingon freeboaters, led by Kolos, and an Andorian fleet led by Shran. The Romulans were forced to retreat, but they soon regrouped and launched a counter-attack. All of the Romulan ships stationed in the Romulan system were dispatched to join them, giving them a significant tactical advantage. But Captain Archer received reinforcements yet again, this time in the form of a combined Vulcan, Andorian, Tellarite armada, which turned the battle back in the Coalition's favour. While the battle raged above Shran, the USS Lexington led a fleet of Denobulan ships in a battle group towards Romulus, which the Romulans had left undefended. This ruse worked. The Romulan fleet at Shran turned back to defend their homeworld, suffering significant casualties in their retreat. The Lexington and its fleet then withdrew, while Archer's fleet destroyed the Shran shipyards, leaving the Coalition victorious in the Battle of Shran. In the aftermath of this embarrassing defeat, the Romans were forced to negotiate with the Coalition of planets to end the war. Following the battle, United Earth and the Romulan Star Empire negotiated a treaty over the subspace radio, which brought an end to the war. Among other things, the treaty's terms established a Romulan neutral zone, a cordon between Romulan space and the Coalition worlds that both sides' military forces were forbidden from crossing. The neutral zone almost completely enclosed Romulan territory, giving the Coalition plenty of breathing room. Following the treaty, the United Earth established a string of outposts along the edge of the neutral zone, to ensure that the Romulans stayed within their territory. The end of the Earth-Romulan War brought a swift end to the age of Romulan expansion. The establishment of the neutral zone almost completely contained the Romulans, leaving with only a narrow gap that they could expand through without running afoul of a treaty, and the Romulan Senate was much less eager to start new wars after such a humiliating defeat. For the next 100 years, the Romulan Empire would pursue a policy of bitter isolationism, hiding behind the neutral zone and planning its revenge. In hindsight, the Earth-Romulan War was the beginning of a long decline for the Romulan Star Empire. As Romulan leaders descended deeper into paranoia and secrecy, the Empire was condemned to a slow death by stagnation, as its isolation rendered it increasingly irrelevant. In the 23rd and 24th centuries, the Romulans jockeyed for power with the other great powers of the Alpha and Beta quadrants, but their schemes often failed, and they would never again achieve the position of dominance they had before this war. On the Coalition side, the end of the Earth-Romulan War led to the strengthening of relations between the major powers of the Coalition of Planets. In 2161, this led to the United Earth, the Vulcans, the Tellarites, and the Andorians founding a new interplanetary government to rule over former Coalition territory, the United Federation of Planets. This new government would quickly become a dominant power in the Alpha Quadrant, and it would usher in a new age of peace, prosperity, and discovery for its members. The United Federation of Planets formed as a somewhat indirect result of the Earth-Romulan War, among other things of course. Now, this war saw the peoples that would go on to form a federation eke out an unlikely victory against the feared Romulan Star Empire. In that war, combat was so deadly that humanity never found out what the Romulans actually looked like. They knew them only by their terribly powerful warships, aggressively designed and painted with stylized birds of prey. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at that class of ship, the 22nd century Romulan bird of prey. Welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host, Captain Jack, and let's get into it. Before we warp into this video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. Now, we're enjoying making these Star Trek videos on various topics, and we hope you are too. If you do want to support their development, please join our Patreon via the link below. You'll get exclusive access to videos and events, as well as more Galaxy class rewards. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. Okay, engage. As of all things Romulan, the origins of the 22nd century Romulan bird of prey are shrouded in secrecy. At the latest, they entered service as the main attack ships of the Romulan Star Empire in the mid-22nd century, and the first ships of the class were encountered by the Enterprise NX-01 in 2152. The Romulans had many of these starships, built at military shipyards deep within Romulan space, and a few were used as testbeds for experimental technology, such as prototype cloaking devices. Most were simple warships, however, used for patrol duties and fleet engagements. Little is known about the exact specifications of this class of bird of prey. The The ship was 130 meters in length and shaped similarly to the later bird of prey designs. It had a flat teardrop-shaped main hull with a stabilizer fin in its tail, a pair of sleek, upswept support wings, and two angular, claw-like warp nacelles mounted to the wingtips. The hull was originally a dark green in colour, and the undersides of these ships were usually decorated with stylized birds of prey. The 22nd century bird of prey had both impulse engines and warp capability. The ship's two impulse drives were located at the aft end of the ship to either side of a stabilizer fin, while the warp nacelles were, of course, mounted on the wingtips. The nacelles glowed green when active, and though their warp capability is unknown, they could likely reach at least warp 5. This class of bird of prey had at least 6 internal decks, with a bridge located atop a shallow dorsal bulge on the main hull. The plates that generated the main ship's deflector shield grid were also located on the dorsal hull, surrounding this bulge, and they gave the bird of prey powerful shields for a mid-22nd century vessel, allowing the ships to far outclass contemporary shieldless Earth ships in combat, like the NX-01. On top of its deflectors, the bird of prey was equipped with sensor reflectors of some sort, which prevented Earth ships from collecting any sensor data on them, even when the ships weren't even cloaked. This bird of prey was armed with a pair of bow disruptor cannons, and possibly also torpedo launchers of some sort. Some bird of preys were equipped with prototype cloaking screens, which could render the ship invisible to both sensors and the naked eye. However, these early cloaking devices were unstable, as the enormous amounts of power they required put a great strain on the ship, and only a few bird of preys actually had them. After the strain from one of these prototypes caused an antimatter containment failure that destroyed the bird of prey known as Praetor Pontulus, these cloaking devices were mothballed, and it would be another century before the Romans developed cloaking devices that worked reliably. As a consequence, most ships of this class lacked cloaking devices, but they still had sensor dampeners. This version of the bird of prey was the Romulan Star Empire's primary combat ship in the 22nd century, and it was deployed on patrol duties along the Empire's borders and in the battles of the Earth-Romulan War. The ship's design, with its powerful sensor dampeners and its use with both byproducts of the Romulan society's isolationist yet expansionist philosophy. From their earliest days, the Romulans were warlike people. Originally, they were actually Vulcans, but they rejected the teachings of Suurok, the founder of the Vulcan philosophy of logic over emotion, and waged wars against his followers. After their defeat, they were exiled from Vulcan, and they settled on the twin planets Romulus and Remus, and set it to establish an empire. The Romulan Star Empire was brutal and expansionist, dominating and sometimes even enslaving the peoples it came across, and it sought total control whenever it was available. Some peoples were outright conquered by the Romulans, while others were covertly dominated by them. Romulan operatives kept the Romulans' neighbours divided and weak through espionage and interference, preventing any of them from becoming a threat, and they often did this without their enemies ever learning what a Romulan actually looked like. The bird of prey design reflected this. They reflected the Romulan Empire's aggression and desire for conquest, but it also reflected the Empire's deep-rooted fears. The Romulan Star Empire was a totalitarian government with a rigid hierarchy, in which Romulans often seized power through deception, assassination, and sabotage. This method of advancement created a society where no one could trust anyone. Over the centuries, this made the Romulans a deeply paranoid people, to the point where their homes had fake front doors, with the real entrances being out back. And as a result, the Romulan Star Empire was secretive as it was aggressive, fearing what it imagined enemies might do if they learned too much. Therefore, its ships were designed to be difficult to scan, and they patrolled the Empire's borders constantly to prevent outsiders from entering their space. As a result, when humanity had its first encounter with the Romulans in 2152, the Romulans became concerned about this threat the new species might pose. This encounter saw the Enterprise NX-01 accidentally stray into a Romulan minefield, prompting an encounter with two birds of prey. But they soon prepared to destroy the ship, which escaped only in the nick of time. Over the next few years, the Romulans began studying humanity, and as Earth began to cool tensions between its neighbours, the Romulans became increasingly frantic in trying to keep the other Alpha Quadrant species divided. This ultimately resulted in the Earth-Romulan War, in which many of these birds of prey saw action against the United Earth Starfleet and some of its allies. Romulan birds of prey devastated the planets Harkona and Dralax during the war, and they participated in almost every battle. Since they never saw Romulans face to face, the Romulan bird of prey and their distinctive raptor graphics became the face of the Romulan Empire to Starfleet crews. Despite the power of these starships, the Romulans lost the Earth-Romulan War in 2160. In the years after, the Romulans went into isolation for a while, and the 22nd century bird of prey was replaced with a newer, more advanced model. During the 24th century, however, the design would be revived and reworked into the Suurok-class light warbird, which saw limited use in the Romulan fleet. After the collapse of the Romulan Star Empire, the Devarro saw use in the fleets of the Tal Shiar, the Romulan Republic, and the Remans. These ships were popular among the post-Imperial Romulan states, though their resemblance to the older 22nd century bird of prey was mostly visual and not functional. The 22nd century Romulan bird of prey was designed for Star Trek Enterprise's second season, specifically for the episode Minefield, which featured the first contact, and I use air quotes there, between humanity and the Romulans. Production designer John Eaves designed the ship, which is slated to be built as a CGI model. While the script only described the ship as ominous looking and bird-like, Eaves set out from the beginning to make a ship a more retro version of a 23rd century bird of prey from the original Star Trek series. Eaves' design for the new bird of prey closely evoked the original, with the same general shape but with curvier wings and warp nacelles, a more greebled and dynamic hull, and most importantly, much more segmentation, which made the ship look older and more primitive. Early sketches of the new bird of prey had a more rounded warp nacelles that matched the original more closely, as well as a pair of triangular spurs that continued the shape of the wings on the other side of the nacelles. Eaves dropped the spurs and revised themselves to be more aggressive looking and dagger-like, and a new bird of prey was born. The new bird of prey was coloured green to match the Romulan aesthetic established in Star Trek The Next Generation and beyond, rather than the dull grey of the original series bird of prey. But Eaves originally designed it with a bird of grey graphic on the underside to better align with the original series as well. That concept was sadly rejected by the producers, though VFX artist Rob Bonchoon, who built Eaves' design into a CGI model, also built the model with a graphic anyway. Enterprise's bird of prey only appeared on screen in Minefield, but it was supposed to make another appearance in Season 4 in the episode Kishara, to extract a Romulan operative from Vulcan. This scene was slated to use a bird of prey variant with a bird graphic on the underside, which would have been featured prominently in the shot. Unfortunately, this scene was cut due to budgetary concerns. So that's a look at the 22nd century Romulan bird of prey. As mentioned, you can support the development of Trek Central's videos. Please join our Patreon via the link below. You'll get exclusive access to videos and events, as well as more Galaxy-class rewards. If you do want to keep up to date on the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. For now, I've been Captain Jack, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends. Goodbye.